listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
I haven't slept for 48 hours, so this episode might be even more rock and roll than normal. As a million of you on Twitter already know, that's because in the early hours of yesterday morning, my good wife gave birth to our third, my sixth child. It was very grueling indeed, but I'm over it, at least well enough to present this evening's show. In the final hour, we'll be unveiling the baby's name and her very first picture show to the great audience of the mother of all talk shows. But between now and then, we'll be dealing with deadly, serious stuff, and I emphasize deadly. In the week of the anniversary, 75th, of the explosions at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, a conventional explosion in the port of Beirut dealt devastation not seen for a very long time, even in the troubled city, the capital of Lebanon. Billions of dollars worth of damage, hundreds of people dead, thousands of people maimed, and every house flattened. But the political implications may be even more significant than all of that. We'll be talking about coronavirus, about Donald Trump, about Joe Biden, and about the epidemic of fatherlessness in Britain and indeed across most of the Western world. But the main burden of my remarks will be on Lebanon, which I first entered as a very young man more than 40 years ago. It opened the door to the Arab world for me. It's right here in my heart, and I can feel their pain and shall express it. Stay tuned and fasten your seatbelts. This is Rock and Roll Radio with pictures.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway.
This is Radio Sputnik.
And this is London, but coming to you, of course, all over the world, thanks to the wonders of the internet and SputnikNews.com. We are, of course, on FM in the Washington, D.C. area. 105.5 are the magic numbers there. And on AM from coast to coast, right across the United States of America. You can listen worldwide on SputnikNews.com, but as hundreds of thousands of you now do every week, you can watch as well as listen. If you are watching on Facebook, either on my Facebook page or on the multiple RT Facebook pages, please, please, please share, share, share. It's very important you tell all of your friends on Facebook that this show is broadcasting now. Now, we're also, of course, on YouTube, and we are on Twitter and even on Instagram. We're even on one or two other platforms of which I know little. But we now have a health warning. Unlike the Voice of America, which does exactly what it says on the tin, i.e. Speak for America, unlike the BBC, so intimately connected to the state that you go to prison if you don't pay the state their license fee, even if you never watch the BBC. They can shill for free and no health warning, no label stuck on their chest. But we, on the other hand, are speaking truth to power. We are acting as we speak. We are providing pluralism. We are providing different voices, different takes. Me and Alex Salmond on Scotland, for example. All kinds of people are appearing on RT, but now they will have to wear a badge on their chest. Now, it's a small badge, to be sure, but a cloud no bigger than a man's hand can be a harbinger of great storms to come. And so I've got my raincoat in the back of the car just in case. It's very important that you follow my YouTube channel. It's very important you subscribe to it. It's very important that you visit my website, georgegalloway.com. I'm not saying anything's imminent, but we have to be careful that we don't allow this great global university to be somehow censored or somehow closed down. Do you feel me? Good. Now, in 1977, along with my editor today, that's how long we have been together, I entered the Arab world through the portal of the great city of Beirut, the capital of Lebanon. I loved it so much, I stayed on when the rest of them went home. I lived amongst the debris and the damage from many years of civil war, which had only temporarily lulled when I was there. So I know Beirut in dark days and fine. I know it at peace and I know it at war. The famous, legendary ingenuity and indefatigability of the Lebanese people has allowed them to drag themselves off the floor many, many times and rebuild this jewel of the Orient, which Beirut and Lebanon represents. It's not just the beauty of the countryside, where you can ski on the mountains in the morning and water ski in the Mediterranean in the afternoon, both of which I myself have done. It's not just the remarkable personality of the Lebanese people. It is the fact that it is a fragile, confessional, cross-sectarian community of people, which was set up by imperial powers, France, about which more later, which divided Lebanon from its mother in Syria and made two states of one piece of Arab land. A familiar prescription, which we have seen in many other places. But never mind Sykes-Picot. The Lebanese people have been making a go of it in the most extraordinary circumstances for a very long time. To be sure, the Lebanese government, all governments in Lebanon and across the Arab world, are run by crooks. To be sure, corruption is endemic in the Lebanese state. But just as the bumblebee, according to the laws of aerodynamics, cannot fly, its wings are too short, its body too heavy, according to the normal laws of politics and economics, Lebanon could not survive, but survive it has. It has an extraordinary political system, which is one of the main problems for the vultures that have landed, literally, in Beirut over the last few days. Principal amongst them, little Bonaparte Macron, whose own streets have been burning for over a year. His own security forces leveling out atrocious violence against his own people. But he's landed in Beirut as the savior, the colonial power returned. But the problem for Macron and for President Trump and all the other vultures that are gathering is that they cannot call for democracy in Lebanon. And I'm going to explain why, because I discovered in the last couple of days a very large number of people don't know why. You see, the president of Lebanon has to be a Christian, according to the constitution. The prime minister of Lebanon has to be a Sunni Muslim. And the speaker of the parliament, the least important of these three positions, has to be held by a Shiite Muslim. Now, the main problem with that is that since that scheme was drawn up, the Shiites have become, perhaps they always were, overwhelmingly the biggest community in Lebanon. So the biggest community in Lebanon gets the least important position in the government, and the Christians get the presidency and the Sunnis get the premiership. So if you had one man, one woman, one vote in Lebanon, then Said Hassan Nasrallah would be the president, in a landslide, actually. But Hezbollah don't want political power in Lebanon. They are the main defenders of a political system that keeps them in the least important political position, because they know that to tamper with this extremely fragile sectarian schema risks all-out civil war and the total destruction of the country, and that's what they don't want. So Trump and Macron, unlike in other places, cannot demand one man, one woman, one vote for Lebanon, because that would lead to the overwhelming victory of the political force that they like least. So what you have in Lebanon is an alliance between the Shiite blocs of Amal, led by the Speaker of the Parliament, Nabih Berri, Hezbollah, and the Christian General Aoun, who is the president of the country. Now, you can imagine that that is a powerful bloc, and that's the problem. It's a powerful bloc defending Lebanese sovereignty from those who would transgress against it. It's a powerful bloc stopping the rise of the very Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and other Islamist fundamentalists in Lebanon that rose and rose and rose with Western support in Syria. And so we're asking on the poll right now, will Lebanon become the next A, Ukraine, B, Hong Kong, or C, Syria? And Syria is running away with it. 65% of the vote so far. And that's the game, ladies and gentlemen. Having failed to achieve regime change in Syria, the Syrian Arab army and people and their allies, having defeated ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria, they want to have another go in Lebanon and see if they can't take down both Lebanon and Syria with one bowling ball. Do you get me? That's what's going on in Lebanon. Of course, corruption. Of course, crooks. Of course, malfeasance. And of course, above all, who left 2,700 tons of ammonium nitrate in a warehouse in the port of Beirut for 7 years? Who left it there? But just as importantly, who brought it there? Whose ammonium nitrate was this? To whom was it being sent? The ship from which it was confiscated was a Moldovan registered ship, because of course Moldova is a big maritime power. But the owners of the ship were Ukrainian. So we have a Ukrainian ship registered in Moldova, docking in Beirut, 2,700 tons of one of the world's deadliest explosives, confiscated and left in the warehouse in the port of Beirut. Big questions, those, aren't they? Where was the destination of that explosive? Why did it dock in Beirut? My own theory is this. We'll test it with a real expert in just a few minutes. This explosive material was intended for the rebels in Syria. It was destined for Al-Qaeda and ISIS. It was part of the regime change operation in Syria. But it was intercepted and taken off, and then nobody did anything about it. But how did it explode? Was it a fire in a fireworks factory next to it? Was it, as Donald Trump said, a bomb, an attack? Or was it a pure industrial accident of utterly devastating proportions? These are the questions that we'll be discussing with Rania Khalek, my colleague, my friend, who was there when it happened. We'll be talking about the aforementioned Donald Trump. We'll be talking about his putative opponent, Joe Biden. I enter the word putative because the more I see him, the less I believe that he is going to be the candidate against Trump in November. I believe the Democrats are involved in one of the most complex political conspiracies in all American history, about which more later. We'll also be talking about the epidemic of fatherlessness. As the father of 6 children myself, I'm well familiar with the pitfalls of the children's justice system, of the rights of fathers, and of the responsibilities of fathers. Fathers often have almost no rights and often take almost no responsibility. I'm in no doubt, call me a social conservative if you like, that a family without a father is not going to function as well as a family with a father. A child that grows up without a father's influence is more likely to go off the rails than one who doesn't. That's not, of course, to say that single-parent families, male or overwhelmingly more often female, don't bring up their children well. That would be absurd. Some of the best families, some of the best upbringings have been from single-parent households. But that being true does not negate my point that yin and yang, mum and dad, is the best way we've found as a human race so far to raise children, to bring up families. That's what I believe in any case. And we'll be canvassing those points with you as well as with our expert guests in the course of the show. And of course, no show, I'm afraid, is complete in this year of 2020 without a discussion about the coronavirus, which is now spiraling out of control in many parts of the world and even in some parts of Britain. In Aberdeen, we have a new lockdown. In Greater Manchester, extended now to Preston, we have a new lockdown. We have people in their tens, scores of thousands, cheek by jowl, on beaches in England right now. I don't know where they go to the toilet, by the way, but then that's just the kind of silly thing I wonder when I see them. But my main question when I see them is, if you're not maintaining social distance, if anybody on that beach has got the coronavirus, you have a very real chance of catching it, just as the people in Aberdeen did when they went to a pub innocently, as they were entitled to do just last week. And now the whole city and the whole economy is locked down. We'll be talking too about Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein. Now, I'm no stranger to sexual deviancy. I spent nearly 30 years in Parliament, which was full of it. One of my colleagues was found dead with Satsuma in his mouth, dangling from the ceiling, whilst dressed in ladies' lingerie. And I'm not making that up. That's what happened to a Conservative member of Parliament, a grandee of the world of business journalism, when I was sitting in the House of Commons. The Scottish Parliament is even gayer. They boast they are the gayest of all parliaments anywhere in the world. But it came nonetheless as a shock to me, because I remembered that Prince Andrew's ex-wife, Fergie, came a cropper because she was sucking somebody's toes, and somebody caught her on camera. And suck one toe, you'll always be remembered as a toe sucker. According to the papers now unsealed in the United States of Ghislaine Maxwell, Prince Andrew too was a toe sucker, according to a young girl then aged 17 who had been illegally trafficked in order to have her toes sucked by Prince Andrew. It's a family show, so we won't go any further than that, but it is the mother of all talk shows.
Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Comrade, tired of being trapped in mainstream media? Join the revolution with mother of all talk shows. Has been instrumental in making brain and heart of people stronger, like kettlebell for mind. Don't be brainwashed, CC, an open mind to new way of thinking. If you don't know how, George will teach you. If you won't learn, he will make you. Speak to Comrade Galloway if you think you're hard enough on the mother of all talk shows.
Radio Sputnik.
The mother of all talk shows, with George Galloway. The world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
Well, the poll is raging. Will Lebanon become the next? A, Ukraine, 19%. B, Hong Kong, 16%. C, Syria, a portentous 65%. You can vote now on my Twitter feed at George Galloway. 413 of you have done so far. Now, my friend and colleague, Rachel Blevins, journalist, broadcaster, and RT America correspondent, joins us now to talk all things Americana. And as always, Rachel, a very big welcome on the mother of all talk shows. Now, because you are a delicate young lady, I won't take you down all the byways of Prince Andrew and his peccadillos. I'll just ask you briefly, if you will, before we get on to even more important things, has Ghislaine Maxwell survived another week in an American penitentiary?
You know, George, as far as we know, she has, but we still have yet to see a mugshot. We've yet to see any images of her being arrested or of her being transferred from the prison that she was supposedly taken to in New Hampshire and then taken over to New York. So that still leaves a lot of questions. If we haven't seen anything other than a court sketch, has she been arrested? Is she there? Is it as they say that it is? There's a lot of questions surrounding that. So as far as the report they're saying, they say that she survived another week, but there still seem to be countless questions surrounding her case. And now, as all of these details come out, as there are more documents that are released and unsealed, then we also have to take a look at the U.S. justice system and ask why they've had this information for years and have quite literally done nothing with it.
Quite so. Any other big names other than Prince Andrew particularly embarrassed by the unsealed papers so far?
Well, right now it's the U.S. justice system that should be embarrassed by all of it. But we've talked a lot about Prince Andrew. We've talked about Jean-Luc Brunel, Leslie Wexner, big names like that have been really associated with Jeffrey Epstein. But then all of a sudden those figures just kind of went missing whenever we were told that he went missing as well. And so it does raise those questions of why you've got an FBI and intelligence community here in the United States that is funded to the tune of nearly $63 billion every single year, and yet they're not able to stay on top of those names that are regularly circulated around in the media.
And what did Bill Clinton first see in the multi-millionaire pervert Jeffrey Epstein?
That's an excellent question. Bill Clinton is one of those whose name was mentioned on Epstein's flight logs a number of times, so we know that he flew on his plane. We know that Bill Clinton has been mentioned by Epstein's victims, and we also know that he had meetings with Epstein while he was in the White House. And so as to why there's not a lot more fanfare surrounding that, I can't say, but Bill Clinton definitely has gotten off easy on this one so far.
And yet Donald Trump is still sending his love to Ghislaine Maxwell. What's that all about?
Right. It's been interesting to see Donald Trump try to almost distance himself a little bit by saying, he didn't know these people, even though he's been pictured with these people a number of times. And even though he's made a number of comments about Jeffrey Epstein himself, saying that he likes girls a little on the younger side. Well, now Trump is kind of having to walk those comments back. And he's probably hoping that they don't follow him all the way to the 2020 election.
Let's talk about that then. I saw a picture of Joe Biden on a bike. I don't know if he knew he was on a bike. I'm certain he didn't know where he was going. But this is a clear attempt to try and halt the now majority feeling in the United States, according to the opinion polls, that Joe Biden is approaching, if not already in, a state of senility.
It does seem that way. And, I saw that same video of Biden. He got out of his basement, it appears. He was riding on a bike, and a reporter on the sidelines was asking him, who is your vice presidential pick? And he pointed at the reporter and he said, you. And then his campaign had to come out and walk it back and say, no, he didn't actually mean that. He was just kidding. But it does bring up the fact that there's so much we still don't know. I mean, we're talking about a Biden ticket for the Democratic Party, and we don't even know who the other half of that ticket is. We're talking about debates hopefully happening, but, the Biden campaign has really distanced themselves from that. And it seems like every single week now we get some new soundbite of him in some ridiculous interview making comments that his campaign is having to come back and apologize for.
Yeah, I mean, I saw some video that they're leading him around like a child. And hurrying him on so that he doesn't say too much to anyone. But that can't possibly last as a strategy until November. And he himself has said he looks forward to the debates with President Trump. So it's going to be difficult for them now to walk that back. It would be like watching Mike Tyson fighting a small child to see Donald Trump against Joe Biden in his current state, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it definitely seems like if we do get an in-person debate or even a virtual debate for that matter, it would definitely be something that would be much more of a reality or entertainment show than actually two legitimate presidential candidates who are arguing back and forth about policies and about what they're going to try to bring to the United States over the next 4 years. Well,
Biden might well be entering senility, but Donald Trump seems to me more and more unhinged. Some of the statements that he's making and his walkout today from a press conference, literally just waving and walking off the stage, there's good grounds for saying that he might actually not make it either. I mean, if you add the mental state of these two candidates together, you don't get Gerald Ford.
Yeah, and it's crazy to think that we're talking about the two richest political parties in the United States, and yet these are the two candidates that they have to offer right here. When it comes to Donald Trump, this has certainly been his race to lose whenever it comes to this election, and yet when we're at a time when he could really be stepping up, he seems to kind of be backing down in a lot of ways, especially when you're talking about the fact that the United States has just now hit 5 million coronavirus cases, a world record. And yet Trump came out this week and he said that he wanted to bring some executive actions. He wanted to stand up for those Americans who are facing eviction or who are struggling to pay their loans because of unemployment. And yet he's gotten a lot of backlash from that, from people saying, well, it's easy for him to talk and to say that he wants to bring those executive actions, but to actually put those actions into place, that's going to be another thing coming.
So what's your feeling about it, Rachel? I know what the polls say. They show Biden consistently ahead by about 10 points, less in the swing states. If you were calling it now, is it Biden, you think?
Well, when looking back at 2016, Donald Trump was consistently behind Hillary Clinton whenever it came to the polls. They said that there was no chance of him winning, and then he managed to win it anyway. But we also have to remember, when looking back at 2016, the United States saw the lowest voter turnout in 20 years because nearly half of Americans said that they would rather just stay home and not vote at all than to have to go and vote for two of the most unpopular candidates in U.S. history. Now we've replaced Hillary Clinton with Joe Biden, but at the same time, it seems like we're right back in that same place where we have two unpopular candidates that no one really wants to vote for. So I think whenever it comes down to this election, I think it's going to be really close, but it could still be Trump taking it away, just as long as he, gets those coronavirus cases down and gets the economy back into some sort of shape that people are actually happy with. It could still be his race.
So finally, and I'm grateful for your time, the $64,000 question, therefore, is who is Biden's vice presidential pick?
I don't even know if he knows at this point. They've said that it may be Kamala Harris, who is a senator who was initially running for the Democratic nomination herself, but she got a lot of backlash from her record as a prosecutor and from the fact that she specifically targeted poor minorities in her area. We've also heard people talk about Susan Rice, who was President Obama's national security advisor, but of course, she was embedded right there in all of his administration's foreign policy decisions. And so basically what they've guaranteed is to say that they're not going to say it just yet whenever it comes to the vice presidential pick, but it will certainly be someone who is going to stay within that establishment and is going to toe the party line no matter what, even if Joe Biden doesn't make it that far.
Rachel Blevins, as always, big thanks for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Thank you. Poll, will Lebanon become the next Ukraine, the next Hong Kong, or the next Syria? You can vote now on my Twitter feed. I'm being flooded with paperwork. Sean says, in response to the poll, every country that America has touched in the Middle East has turned into another Syria. And on Twitter, Mr. S says, Moats needs to be available live to everyone on TV instead of the stuff on the BBC News channel. Fortunately, I have YouTube. Hi, George. Thank you, Mr. S. Glynis says, congratulations to you all and welcome to your new baby girl. Lovely news. Thank you, Glynis. You'll see her picture and the name later in the show. Phil says, Lebanon battered and beaten economically and physically for so many years. This catastrophe is very convenient and it's heartbreaking. And by email, Matt says, here in Portugal, there are shops and bars with antiviral cash machines. These are tills into which money is inserted and the change dispensed without any human contact or manipulation. Do you have anything similar in England? I don't know, actually. Maybe someone can tell me that. YouTube, Levi says, Dr. Ranjeet did a superb stream the other day. Honestly, the man is a legend. He is indeed. And Peace for All says, hope those victims of royal toe-sucking had athlete's foot. And Richard says, George, I'm strapped in for a bumpy ride. And Paul says, I missed my weekly smile with Burning City to Burning City. I thought it was unkind, Paul. And on Facebook, June says, congratulations, best wishes to you and your family on your new arrival. You make me even more proud to be Scottish, if indeed that is possible. Thank you, lovely June. Thanks for that. I've got a lot of name suggestions coming in. I'll better leave them till later. Eve in Idaho is on the line now. Go ahead, Eve.
Hello, George. Today I have a question for you. The Epstein, we know about the sex trafficking, the rape, and all that aspect. We also believe that he was working for the Mossad, but we don't have any proof for it. But I would like, because I think you know that part very well, I would like you to shed some light on the armed trafficking. He began his career, Epstein, with armed trafficker and armed trafficking. And I would like you to speak about that.
I can't, because I don't know about it. So if you do, please tell us, Eve.
Oh, no, I thought your name, because your name was referred many times in an interview they had. They had an interview of somebody who knew.
I think. Are you confusing with Maxwell? I did reveal that Robert Maxwell, Ghislaine's father, had been involved in arms trafficking, but I don't know anything about Epstein and arms trafficking. I do know that his rise is completely inexplicable, undereducated, underachieving, and becoming a billionaire with other people's money. Living in the largest townhouse in Manhattan, which he purchased for $1 single, evading prosecution for years, whilst randomly committing sex crimes against children, whilst being uninterrupted in the course of that criminality by the law enforcement agencies. And then when in Florida the law began to crank into action, down came the hand from Washington to stay the investigations and possible prosecutions. I'm absolutely certain that the reason all these powerful political men were drawn into the orbit of Epstein was so that they could be filmed in compromising situations and blackmailed, either for money or for political favors. All of that I'm sure of, Eve, but I don't know anything about him being an arms trafficker.
There was no relation between Epstein and Khashoggi. I don't know if he's the one who was butchered recently or if it was the one who sold.
Maybe if you get any further particulars, let us have them. If anyone knows of any connection between Epstein and Khashoggi, please let me know. Our phone number is 02077 982 255 and from the US 001 757 744 4480. Now, my short for RT this week was on Beirut. Here it is. Whatever, whoever was responsible for what happened in Beirut has managed to push a country already on the edge, over the cliff, into the pit of catastrophe. Beirut was the portal through which I myself entered the Arab world more than 40 years ago. I fell in love with it at first sight, as anyone who's ever been there will tell you the same. Lebanon is a simply magical place where, as the brochures used to say, you could ski in the mountains in the morning and water ski in the Mediterranean in the afternoon. That was how it was packaged, of course, the reality of many hundreds of thousands of people living in Palestinian refugee camps or living in poverty as an oppressed sect in Lebanon, unseen, unnoticed, and certainly not acknowledged for decades, has all changed. Lebanon, by virtue of its very creation, by the Sykes-Picot Agreement, its division from its motherland in Syria, has always been a place of multiple crises, crisscrossing the confessional and sectarian nature of the country. And yet, despite the civil war, despite the crises, the legendary fortitude and ingenuity of the Lebanese people allowed them to drag themselves out of the pit of 1970s civil war and rebuild that magical place, a magnet for travelers from all over the world, not least travelers from the Arabian Gulf and from other Arab countries. $3 billion worth of devastation in an instant when the port, the harbour of Beirut blew up. As far as we know, by accident, though who can tell in that part of the world. $3 billion, 100 dead and thousands injured. Already collapsing hospitals due to economic crises have now been overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the casualty list. But the explosion in Beirut is merely the proximate cause of this catastrophic crisis. Lebanon was already in severe trouble as a result of sanctions. Our old friend, sanctions again. The sanctions against Syria have been extended into Lebanon as the United States empire tries to reconfigure political power in Lebanon. But there are some facts that simply will not shift. Hezbollah, the majority Shiite political party, has overwhelming support from the overwhelmingly most numerous section of the Lebanese population. Their alliance with the legendary Christian military officer, now President General Aoun, makes them a powerful coalition that simply cannot be wished away. Those who want to wish them away have persuaded the United States administration that Lebanon is an enemy. The price and even availability of staples will now be threatened in a potentially deadly way by the utter devastation of the port through which almost everything that Lebanon eats comes in. If the United States had any sense, it would now call off the war against Lebanon. It would flood Lebanon with humanitarian aid and financial credits. It would bail out Lebanon and gain the honor that they long ago lost. Gain, too, the hearts and minds of the people, not just in Lebanon, but throughout the Arab world where Lebanon is a national treasure. But I'm not sure that the United States has a heart, or even a head, certainly a head with a brain in it. It's likely that attempts will be made to try and blame others for the catastrophe which has occurred. Donald Trump said from the podium that his great generals had told him that the catastrophe was caused by an attack, by a bomb. That's not what the Lebanese government say, but inquiries are at an early stage. It would be hardly any surprise if bomb and attack it was. After all, Israel has been attacking Lebanon almost every day, certainly every week, for as long as I've been going there. That's more than 40 years. It might not be any of the parties involved in the complicated political situation in Lebanon. It could be someone else entirely. We'll have to wait and see what is harvested by the inquiry now underway. But if history is anything to go by, the rumour mill will make the judgment long before the inquiry report is published. Lebanon's economic catastrophe and its political crises are about to get much worse. As for the people of the world, I think our responsibility is clear. The whole world has to rise up now and demand that we save Lebanon, a precious jewel of the Orient.
Have something to say? Do you disagree with George? Then call us now and give us your view.
Now, if you're watching on Facebook, please right now share with all of your friends, because we're being algorithmically squeezed in all kinds of places. Do you get me? So please, now, if you're on Facebook, share with your friends. Let's take A call from Simon in South Ribble. Go ahead, Simon.
Hello, George.
Nice to hear from you. What would you like to say?
Well, first of all, I'd just like to say before I start, just to congratulate you from myself and my wife on the birth of your little girl.
Thank you, Simon. There's life in us old dogs yet.
Yeah, really, I'll tell you what I was ringing you for was, you probably heard that there's a lockdown in Preston.
Yes.
Well, I mean, it's just a soundbite, to be honest with you, that's out on the news because there's absolutely no way that it's a lockdown. I was driving through, I live in South Ribble, which isn't under the lockdown, we're just to the south of the Ribble, so we haven't come under that lockdown yet. But I was driving through Preston yesterday evening. All the pubs are open, bouncers are outside, letting people in just as they would normally. Everyone's outside fagging it, little close groups, not a couple of metres apart, 3 or 4 people within 1 or 2 metres, like they would normally be if nothing was going on. The police are walking around 6 inches apart, no face shields on, no face masks. It really isn't a lockdown, George.
It's typical, isn't it, Simon? Isn't that where we've been throughout in this whole thing? Things are called things that they actually aren't. Things are introduced too slowly and lifted too quickly. Two of my kids are in Greater Manchester, but their area is not under lockdown. So their cafes and pubs and so on are open as normal, or the new normal. And as you describe it now, Preston doesn't sound like it is actually under lockdown at all.
No, it's not. It's not. And to be honest with you, I mean, I feel sorry for, the authorities. I mean, although I absolutely hate the Tories, I feel sorry for the position that Boris is in because it's an absolutely impossible position to be in. And I don't know what the answer is. I don't think anyone knows what the answer is. But saying there's a lockdown and then there isn't, surely that just doesn't help.
No. Listen, great call, Simon. Love to the wife also. Thank you for your good wishes. Brian is in Glasgow on the issue of fathers' rights. Go ahead, Brian.
Hi, George, and congratulations, young man.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, George, I tried to sort of get people to understand when you mentioned fatherlessness. I think this, if you discuss it correctly, would be historic, and it's the biggest elephant in the room. And this idea that when we talk about the right of fatherhood, it's somehow the right of men or the fathers. It's about something that automatically implies a scenario involving 3 people, a man, a woman, and a child. And fatherhood, roughly 150 years ago, lost its legal standing. And the implications of that are still being avoided by parliamentarians. I can attest to this personally. I, in my own case, my own journey, is actually intimately part of the reason why there's a 2006 Family Law Scotland Act. Yet that Act does not comply with ECHR because it applies gender, a protected status, and whether the parent is married to decide blanket that those persons will not enjoy an ECHR right to family life.
If they're not married. If they're not married.
That is irrelevant. That is the point. The law sees that as irrelevant. Being married or not married has no bearing in law to whether someone should have access or not to their child.
Well, I'll tell you what, Brian, the way I look at it is this. It's the child that has the right to a father. And for far too many people, including the judges, are making decisions that deprive the child of that right to having a father in their
George,
life.
I think this is I know you've got a law background, but don't you understand?
I don't. I left school at 15, Brian. I've no law background.
I apologise.
Yeah.
Right. Well, 20 years.
You overestimated me.
Sorry, I apologise. 20 years of going over attrition, dragged through a court to try and get access to my own child, and therefore reading case law, Supreme case law. I can tell you, it's axiomatic that judges may make decisions that outside look like they have just discounted the father because it's built into the law. And if they are pressed with a certain amount of what you and I would not class as against the interests of the child, they're on a time limit. This child's supposed to go on to its family life. They are forced but they don't see it that way. It's just the law. But the fact is that if you sit down a judge, or indeed an ex-legislator, or a legislator currently, and you're an ex-legislator, and ask them to explain how it is you can deny someone, because of their gender and their marital status, either the child in question or that parent, the same rights as everyone else, you cannot apply that to the test and come up with an answer. In other words, you have all fraudulently took us into a position in law that is clearly incompatible with the law it sits in. Hence why I'm trying to say we are all being denied our basic human rights by the legislator. Not one legal document sits anywhere that would give a legal proof that would be peer reviewable, that explains how compliance was achieved with regard to this law. It's a legal fraud.
Well, look, I'll tell you what, Brian, we've got coming up later Michael Lewkowicz, who's Director of Communications at Families Need Fathers. So that's in the second hour. Stay tuned for that. Thanks very much indeed for the call. Guy, who's almost a legend in Stoke-on-Trent. Good to hear from you again, Guy.
Yeah, good evening, George. And first of all, congratulations on your daughter, new arrival. Hope everything goes well.
Thanks.
But I'm actually calling for condolences and sympathy to the hundreds who've lost their lives and the injured in Beirut.
Mm-hmm.
But the call I'm making is that when the news story broke, I was watching with interest, as millions must have been, and the BBC, well, it was Sky and the BBC did similar. They did a backstory on Lebanon, and they concentrated. One of the things they said was that the government is corrupt. Now, I don't know if they are or they aren't. And then they said that the currency was devalued by 90%, and they give examples of how terrible life was in Lebanon. And I thought they would have added into the backstory the fact that Lebanon was under sanctions from the USA and the EU. Yep. And they might have introduced that there'd been a war there in 2007 with Israel, and not one mention. And I just felt that the news coverage was lacking in context.
Yeah. Well, they probably had that package ready for the event, if you get my drift. The reality is the devaluation, which is actually 800% of the Lebanese currency, is because of the sanctions. And the sanctions are being imposed on Lebanon because of the war in Syria. And therefore, the regime of sanctions and the constant attacks on Lebanon, virtually daily, certainly weekly, are the reason why Lebanon is in the state it's in. Of course it has crooks in the government, but those crooks are the best friends of the Western countries now demanding an end to corruption in Lebanon. That's the truth of the matter. Guy, last word to you.
It's come to the point now with myself, when I watch the mainstream news, I'm just looking for objective stories, i.e. there's been an explosion. The backstory now, I just switch off because I know it will not be a detailed account. It will be a very edited account.
Well, you're only going to get balance on RT, despite the label that they've slapped on us. I watched yesterday with mounting fury, actually, as the RT news anchor in Moscow interviewed, how shall I put it, one of the anti-government leaders in Beirut, who was reading straight off the American, French, Trump, Macron script. And the interview went on and on and on. Only RT is giving a balanced view of what's happening in Lebanon. Even if I didn't like hearing that story, that Franco-American imperialist story and narrative, endlessly broadcast on RT last evening. Just goes to show RT's far more fair and balanced than the others. Coming up to the news, let me get a couple of comments in. Rita is angry with me. I'm sorry, Gigi, that nonsense about single parenthood is rubbish. I'm a mental health clinician and a single parent. So what you say is absolute nonsense. Well, you haven't pointed out why, Rita, but you could call and we'll put you straight on. Roy says, thanks for shedding light on Lebanon's situation. You are our voice around the world. Thank you, Roy. And Rob says a Marshall Plan for Lebanon would be wise and compassionate. And Elias says, there is great influence and misleading children today, especially with drugs. And Tom says, sadly, Maxwell will not be going to prison because deals have been done to protect the liberal elites. Let me take Omar in Dubai on Lebanon. Omar, welcome to the show.
Hi, Mr. George. How are you?
By the grace of God, I'm good. Thank you. What would you like to say?
You know, just to say that you're a legend. You've done a lot for
Thank you.
Lebanon ever since your 2006 interview on Sky News. That was legendary.
Thank you.
No problem. And I actually have a Lebanese friend that recently shared a video with me. I was wondering what you think about it. It's like 7 months ago in Syria, and a huge explosion with the same blast profile. You know, it doesn't look like a regular military munitions. It's very odd to me.
Where was that? I don't recall that blast, Omar. Where was it?
I'm not exactly sure where in Syria, but the footage is available on YouTube, and it has the exact same sort of low, wide mushroom cloud looking explosion, and there was a primary explosion. And I've seen a lot of videos shared by my Lebanese friends as well, where the people in Beirut, when the explosion happened, say they saw it falling. You know, I don't know what they're referring to, but I think it seems compelling that there was some kind of an attack.
The Lebanese government is adamant that there was no attack. Donald Trump was equally adamant that there had been, and he said his great generals had told him so. The Pentagon, though, denied that afterwards. They basically said they didn't know what Donald Trump was talking about. I'll tell you what, Omar, if you could put a link to that video of the Syrian explosion up on our Twitter feed, that would be helpful. Then people can see what it is that you are talking about. And thank you very much indeed for your kind words. La shukra ala wajib. Don't thank me for my duty. And one more or two more social media. Sadly, Maxwell, I've done that one. YouTube says Robert says Lebanon also could turn into Libya. And on Twitter, Lisa says, I read somewhere over the weekend that Tulsi Gabbard will be Biden's vice president. Or was this a hoax? I think a hoax, Lisa. And Phil says, my two siblings and I were brought up by my mother. Father, an alcoholic, no interest in his kids. I have 3 daughters with my wife, and I am a better father thanks to the lessons taught to me by my mum. Please don't belittle single-parent families. What can you say? What can you say? Maria says, I love Moats, but tonight I'm here for the baby. Thank you, Maria, for that. Dr. Fath says, great show, George. Just wondering, do you reckon the American people have a genuine case to bring against the Democratic Party or establishment for having a total insult to their intelligence like Joe Biden foisted on them? This surely is a setup. And Gemma says, just heard your opening about families that do better when there is a father around. Not true. Families do best when there are loving, disciplined, caring, encouraging and protective parents raising the child. Whether that is a mum and dad, dad and dad, mum and mum. Well, very right on, Gemma. I have been through the care system, Gemma says, and the couple who adopted me at 10, 2 women, are the best parents I could ever have wished for. And Tony says, how was Epstein a billionaire without any business track record at all? Indeed, indeed, indeed. Now, the poll is still running. Will Lebanon become the next Ukraine? Ukraine, 17%, down 2. Hong Kong, 14%, down 1. Syria, 69%, up 3. You can vote now on my Twitter feed at George Galloway. It's time, I think, for the news with Jamie Lowe.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Tune in every Tuesday to Loud and Clear for a regular segment called False Profits, a weekly look at Wall Street and corporate capitalism, where we talk about the big economic issues of the week from the point of view of working people, the poor, and the U.S. position in the global economy. Join us this Tuesday and every Tuesday with financial policy analyst Daniel Sankey right here on Radio Sputnik.
It's time to double down with Max and Stacy.
Yeah, double down. We're talking markets, finance, business, economics, ka-ching, bling, just about everything money related on Sputnik. It's called Double Down.
We're asking, are dead cats bouncing or have fundamentals changed? That's this week on Double Down.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
Radio Sputnik News.
Brazil has hit a grim milestone of 100,000 coronavirus deaths, only the second country in the world to do so after the United States. The number of people in the country to have died with COVID-19 has rocketed recently, with the coronavirus taking 3 months to kill 50,000 people and then just 50 days to kill the next 50,000. President Jair Bolsonaro, who caught coronavirus last month, has played down the gravity of the pandemic and fought against lockdowns by local officials. The US has recorded 162,425 deaths. Mexico is behind Brazil with 52,006, and there have been 46,651 in the UK, according to Johns Hopkins University. Protesters in Brazil marked the latest death milestone by projecting 100,000 victims of Bolsonaro onto a building in Rio de Janeiro. Britain's Prime Minister Boris Johnson says it's a national priority and a moral duty to get all pupils back in class next month, raising the prospect of closing shops, pubs and restaurants in local lockdowns to allow schools to stay open. In a newspaper article today, the Prime Minister wrote that social justice demands that classrooms are full again and says education is crucial for children's welfare and future, especially the most disadvantaged. Professor Chris Whitty, the Chief Medical Officer for England, warned last week that the nation has probably reached near the limit or the limits of what can be done to reopen society safely. And Professor Neil Ferguson, whose modelling led to the decision to impose the lockdown, suggested ministers would need to row back on the relaxation of restrictions to allow a full-time return to schools while keeping the virus under control. Only 53% of Britons would be certain or very likely to allow themselves to be vaccinated against COVID-19, according to new research. 1 in 6 said they would definitely not get a vaccine, or it would be very unlikely, in a poll of around 2,000 people. The study found that people were more likely to reject the vaccine because of their attitudes and beliefs about science and authority, rather than reasons related to the coronavirus itself. Young people were twice as likely not to want a vaccine, with 22% of 16 to 34-year-olds saying that they would not have one, compared to just 11% of 55 to 75-year-olds. US President Donald Trump has taken executive action to provide economic aid to millions of Americans hit by the pandemic, claiming he was forced to do so after talks at Congress broke down. The directives include measures to support the unemployed, suspend payroll tax, and extend student loans. Some of them are likely to face legal challenges, given that Congress controls federal spending, not the president. Democratic rival Joe Biden said they were a series of half-baked measures. Negotiations broke down on Friday after 2 weeks of talks. It's not known whether the move will mean the end of discussions between senior government officials and top Democrats for a stimulus package. Trump said the measures would provide up to $400 in supplemental unemployment benefits to tens of millions of jobless Americans. This is less than the $600 people had been receiving until the 31st of July, when the benefit expired. The UK has pledged a further £20 million in aid to Lebanon following Tuesday's deadly explosion in Beirut. The support will go directly to those injured and displaced by the explosion, providing access to food and medicine, as well as other urgent supplies. The UK, which has already given £5 million to the emergency relief effort, said it showed its commitment to stand by the Lebanese people in their hour of need. The blast in the city's port destroyed large parts of the surrounding area, killing more than 150 people, injuring more than 5,000 and leaving more than 300,000 homeless. Voters are casting their ballots in Belarus, with five-term President Alexander Lukashenko facing his toughest challenge in years from a political novice. Although Lukashenko is still expected to win, he faces a prominent rival in 37-year-old Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, who is running in place of her jailed husband. Lukashenko, aged 65, was first elected in 1994. His previous landslide victories were condemned by political observers. In the last vote in 2015, he was declared winner with 83.5% of the vote. There were no serious challenges, and election observers reported problems in the counting and tabulation of votes. Today, long queues were seen at some polling stations, including at Belarusian embassies abroad. The music mogul Simon Cowell has broken his back while testing his new electric bicycle at his home in California. Cowell, aged 60, was trying out the bike in the courtyard of his Malibu home when he fell off. He is understood to have had surgery on Saturday evening. A political row between the UK and France over migrant crossings in the Channel has intensified, with Britain's immigration minister saying that the unacceptable increase in numbers simply cannot go on. Chris Philip is due to meet his French counterpart in Paris on Tuesday to discuss stronger measures, including interceptions and returns. It comes after 151 migrants reached the UK on Saturday, taking the total since the 1st of January to 4,100, many arriving in overloaded rubber dinghies. While the southeast England basked in roasting sunshine today, a dozen more people took advantage of calm seas to arrive in Dover after making the dangerous crossing. And finally, scientists in Germany are trying to create the first northern white rhino test tube baby to save the species from extinction. The northern white is functionally extinct after decades of poaching and the wholesale loss of natural habitat. There are 2 remaining females kept under armed guard at a conservancy in Kenya, but neither animal is able to reproduce. The last northern white male, named Sudan, died in 2018. Inside a concert pen in northern Germany, a 17-year-old female called Karen has been selected for the critically important experiment. The scientists are trying to turn her into a mother with fertilized eggs or embryos created in the lab. Theoretically, at least, in vitro fertilization, or in this case, rhino IVF, has the potential to save the northern white rhino, a once numerous grazer which ranged over large parts of Central and Eastern Africa. Well, that's the latest here on Sputnik News. I'm Jamie Lowe.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway, only on Sputnik Radio.
Now, there'll be a poll on the baby's name at 9 o'clock and exclusive pictures, first ever pictures of the new baby Galloway. This current poll: will Lebanon become the next Ukraine, the next Hong Kong, or the next Syria? Still running for the next 15 minutes or so, and you can vote on my Twitter feed at George Galloway. Now, I said all I intend to say about what happened in Beirut. Rania Khalek, my colleague, the legendary journalist, presenter, and writer and broadcaster, was there when the balloon went up, and what a devastating explosion it was too. Rania, our condolences first and foremost. Lebanon lost a lot of blood, a lot of people, a lot of damage of all kinds, including to its political infrastructure. But let's start with the human impact first. First of all, tell us what it was like.
Well, George, first I want to say congratulations on the new baby. I'm very excited that you had such a great week. And yes, it's been a rough week for Lebanon. I was there when the explosion took place, and it's one of the most terrifying, it is the most terrifying thing I've ever experienced. Luckily, I came out uninjured. It was like an earthquake. The windows blew open. And then, there's this big loud sound. But I was one of the lucky ones. Almost every single person I know has an injury. Over 150 people were found dead. And just surveying the damage and the aftermath, I toured the city after this took place and walked around. And I mean, no building, no restaurant, no hotel, no storefront was left untouched by this explosion and the pressure that it created across the city. The level of devastation was so widespread. I've been to Syria, I've been to Iraq, I've seen devastation from war, but it's the kind of devastation that takes place gradually, one street at a time, right? One neighborhood at a time. This was an entire city, just, destruction, as though there had been war there for years, but in a matter of a few minutes.
Now, when you look at that devastation and when you look at the video, several angles now, what's your thought about what could possibly have created such an explosion, such an inferno?
Well, it seems to be the case. I mean, people close to Hezbollah believe this. Lebanese General Security has come to this conclusion. And the more information that comes out, the more it seems that this was a case of just utter incompetence by a completely dysfunctional state, which Lebanon has always been, that left this fertilizer, massive amounts of it, sitting in very improper and dangerous conditions for 6 years until a fire broke out at the port and it exploded. We knew there was a fire at the port about 25 minutes before the ammonium nitrate caught on fire. So it was a fire that started in a different part of the port near the ammonium nitrate, and then the ammonium nitrate caught on fire. We know that over the last 6 years, there have been several complaints and warnings about this material being stored in this way. And so it does seem to have been an accident of epic proportions. That said, in the aftermath of this accident, there are political factions that are allied with the Americans inside Lebanon that are trying to manipulate the situation to put the blame on Hezbollah, which is completely absurd. Of course, the U.S. is encouraging this. I've covered the demonstrations that started taking place in Lebanon last year in October due to the economic collapse. There's a lot of legitimate anger in the streets. People who are angry at the ruling elite, then and now, but there's also rioting taking place, and there's also manipulations by particular political factions trying to take advantage of the situation to try to push against their political rivals, in this case, Hezbollah. So that we need to be very clear about that, because the narrative that we see developing, particularly in the Western media, is this was Hezbollah's fault, which is absolutely untrue. This was the fault of the entire Lebanese power structure, of which Hezbollah plays one part, but that includes several political parties, the most corrupt and at fault of which are actually the ones that are allied with the Americans.
Yes, I made that point earlier. Undoubtedly, there is rampant corruption in Lebanese government. There always has been. There is in all Arab countries, including the Arab countries closest to the West. But the politicians most corrupt in Lebanon have always been the politicians most close to the West.
100%. This economic collapse, the deterioration of Lebanon's economy is the fault of of people like the Hariri family, which is close to Saudi Arabia and the West. Riyad Salemi, who's head of the central bank in Lebanon and actually engineered this entire Ponzi scheme economy that came crashing down, as it ultimately always would, is basically a puppet of the Americans. The people that are the most corrupt in Lebanon are the ones who are always causing the most problems. And unfortunately, we don't get the right picture of that in the West, because everything that happens in Lebanon is always portrayed through the lens of how can we make Hezbollah look bad, right? Because Hezbollah is, you know, an enemy of Israel. It's an ally of Iran. America does not like Hezbollah. They call them a terrorist group. So everything that happens in Lebanon is always viewed in that lens in the West, and it's just wrong. Lebanon is a very polarized place, but the Lebanese that end up getting attention in the Western press end up being people who are allied with these pro-American parties. And the situation is much more complicated and complex and nuanced than that.
Well, in my monologue at the beginning, I was making some, I hope, salient points. If we had proper democracy in Lebanon, then, of course, Hezbollah would have an overwhelming majority in the Lebanese parliament, and Hassan Nasrallah would be the president.
It's possible. Yeah.
And it's only because Hezbollah doesn't want to take power in Lebanon, because it wants to keep the fragile sectarian balance, so that the Christians can always have the president, so that the Sunnis can always have the premiership. So this is a bit of a handicap to Western propagandists, isn't it? Because they can't demand democracy in Lebanon, because democracy would give them the result they least want.
Exactly. And even in this system that we have, Hezbollah does win a large amount of seats in parliament because Hezbollah has a huge constituency. And they have a huge constituency because they are well respected in their community, because they're seen as protectors. They're seen as protectors against the Israelis, who occupied southern Lebanon in a brutal occupation, just like they do to Palestine for years. And the only reason that Israel no longer occupies southern Lebanon is because Hezbollah kicked them out with force. Hezbollah also played a very significant role with the arming and funding of jihadist groups in Syria. Those groups tried to make their way into Lebanon, including ISIS, as well as the litany of American-backed, so-called, revolutionary rebel groups that actually were jihadist groups allied with Al-Qaeda. These groups tried to make their way into Lebanon, and the only reason they didn't make it to Beirut is because of Hezbollah. That's the only reason. I mean, Hezbollah's existence is to protect the borders and the sovereignty of Lebanon. That's how they perceive themselves, and their community perceives them that way. So that's why they have popularity within particularly the Shia community in Lebanon. But of course, there's a lot of propaganda in Lebanon. There's other political factions that view everything through a sectarian lens and despise Hezbollah because those are their political rivals, who are allied with the Saudis, who are allied with the Americans. And so it's really important that people understand that when you do read news about Lebanon, you need to take everything with a grain of salt, because it's being filtered through a Western press that has a very nefarious agenda about what they want to happen there.
Now, we've both seen many times protests and demonstrations and so on around the governmental buildings, the parliament building in downtown Beirut, but yesterday's seemed of a more serious order. They were able to break into several ministries. Can the current government of Lebanon survive? And if it were to fall, what would be the successor government? How is this going to break?
So I do want to be clear about the protests that took place yesterday. There was, of course, those protests were multifaceted. There was people who were angry because they lost their homes, because of the explosion, because of the corruption. And of course, there was also rioters who were sent in there with an agenda that belonged to certain political factions. And then there was also people who are poor and were using it as an opportunity to, loot what they could because they have nothing. So that's important to recognize. But as for the government, I mean, this government was always a temporary government that was very weak, that came about last year after the government of Saad Hariri basically resigned in the aftermath of the October 17th protests. And so, this government is now under extreme pressure because of the explosions, but not just the explosion. The explosion came on top of this economic crisis that was causing a almost overnight deterioration in living standards in Lebanon. Lebanon went from being a pretty middle class, well-off, decent country for a lot of people to having power cuts that last 20 hours a day, to having an unemployment rate that's, skyrocketing, expected to reach 50% by the end of the year. Not just because of COVID-19, though that's a part of it, but also because of the economic collapse. So this government resigning was sort of always inevitable. It was just a matter of time of when they would end up resigning, and the explosion was just so severe and catastrophic. It's caused that. Now, you have these mass resignations and calls for new parliamentary elections. But the thing is, Lebanon, like you mentioned earlier, it has a governmental system that's set up based on sect. It allocates power based on sect. And because of that, Lebanon is always going to have people who are voting for their sect leaders. And so the same people, the same power structures continue to be elected in Lebanon because of the way the system is set up. As long as it's set up by sect, you're going to continue to have the same people, maybe different names and different faces, but ultimately the same elites being in charge of the country. So as long as that stays the same, Lebanon's going to stay the same. Lebanon's going to continue to be a place where, legalized theft and bribery and corruption destroys everything. And until that changes, you're not going to see a real change no matter what government takes power.
Lastly, and I'm grateful for your time, Rania, the infantilism on display from some quarters in Lebanon when President Macron arrived, the cry that France is our mother, and even some asking for a renewal of the French mandate over Lebanon. How far does that go? Surely not far.
So I just want to note that it's interesting to me that Macron cannot walk around parts of France without being booed. But he can come to places like Lebanon and be cheered, right?
Yeah.
In the aftermath of a desperate explosion. But it also, the areas of Beirut that were impacted the hardest because of their proximity to the port are areas that are Christian areas. That are the constituency in those areas is allied with parties like the Lebanese Forces and like the Kataib Party, which are right-wing Christian parties that are allied with the U.S. and are essentially like pro-Israel parties. And so the people in these areas speak French. They have a very, not all of them, but there is a colonial legacy and mentality because Lebanon was initially thought of when they carved up the Middle East as being France's little like Christian island in a sea of Muslims, if you will. And so there are people who view themselves as Christians in Lebanon as sort of like French culturally. They even speak French. They go to French schools. So the area Macron was touring is an area where France and the French are viewed and the colonial legacy of France is viewed in a very positive light. It certainly does not reflect the views across Lebanon at all.
Rania Khalek, thanks for joining us, and thank God you survived the horror of this week in Beirut. Thank you again for joining us. You can vote now on our poll. Will Lebanon be the next Ukraine, Hong Kong, or Syria? Syria's up to 70% now. Certainly that's the hope of those who wish to pull the rug from underneath the state of Lebanon. 636 of you have voted. There'll be a new poll at 9 o'clock where I'll be asking you to help me pick the name of my latest child. Now, you can call now. You'll get through. There's a couple of free lines in the building. Here's the numbers again. 02077 982 255 if you're calling in the UK, or from the US, 001 757 744 4480. 60-second break. There you go.
Tune in every Thursday to Loud and Clear with Brian Becker for a regular segment called Criminal Injustice about the most egregious conduct of our courts and how justice is denied to so many people in this country. Tune in to Loud and Clear this Thursday and every Thursday for thorough and independent analysis of our criminal injustice system.
The giant Labour Party sailing clearance is now on. Hurry now, as we've got zero interest in our party. It's literally the lowest it's ever been. Give up on the common man and save today. That's right, we're getting rid of all of the Corbynites. Literally every single one. Being a Blairite has never been more in style. Only available at what should be the UK's biggest political party. The new Labour Party. We're doing this again.
We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
George Galloway and the mother of all talk shows. Join us at the College of Knowledge, where there are no tuition fees.
Now, there are many peculiarities about politics today. Is the left right? Is the right left? What do these terms mean anymore? And we have a Conservative government that sometimes seems to be throwing public money around like a drunken sailor, at least in some directions, usually to the corporations and the people with whom they're closest. But the Eat Out to Help Out scheme is a particularly controversial one from my point of view, because the same government that is sending messages that the obesity crisis in Britain, which is a real one, is a clear and present danger in the time of the coronavirus, is giving you 50% off your McDonald's or your Nando's or whatever your junk food of choice is. I'm not making that up for foreign viewers and listeners. If you go on a certain day of the week, and if you can get in, to a junk food outlet, you get 50% off your bill, and the government makes up the other 50% to the purveyor. Now, not everyone's against it. Neil Davey is a prominent journalist and author on these kind of issues, particularly on the restaurant industry and hospitality in general. And I'm glad to say that Neil joins us now. Neil, welcome. What about my obesity point?
Good evening, George. You have a very, very valid point on that score. It is, like so many things during this, the last however many years of this particular government, there are many things that appear to be contradictory. From an industry perspective, I think it's a very good thing. The hospitality industry has not been supported particularly well through the furlough scheme. And if you're trying to restore confidence using a sector that by its very nature has high hygiene and cleanliness standards is probably a good way of getting a little bit of confidence back from the average punter.
And how is it working, Neil? I mean, I haven't myself availed myself of it, partly because I don't actually approve of it as a use of public money. But my colleagues through the glass here, they've been trying to find a place that they could get in to get their discount, which seemed to suggest that it's being widely taken up.
It is. It's Monday to Wednesday until the 31st of August. It's 50% off your bill to a maximum of £10. It's very, and it doesn't include alcoholic drinks, does include soft drinks. So, I mean, it's not necessarily a case. I mean, I've been to a couple of cafes not even realising they were part of the scheme, and last week and paid £1.20 for a coffee. So there's a lot of places that are participating without necessarily sort of pushing it out as a publicity thing. A lot of the restaurants that are doing incredibly well through this. They've picked up an awful lot of bookings. Whether it maintains after the 31st of August is the big question.
How has the sector fared, Neil? I mean, obviously a lot of people depend on it for their livelihood. And of course, if I missed anything in the lockdown, I missed going to restaurants. So I'm not trying to be St. Francis here.
No, absolutely.
How badly has the sector been hit?
It's been quite devastating. I mean, for the sector, for the support industries, it's a huge part of British social life. It's a huge part of the economy. And the most recent figures I could find suggest it's worth around £100 billion a year to the UK economy, and that's not necessarily including the producers, the suppliers, the makers of cleaning equipment, all the other sort of peripheral things that sort of go into the industry. A lot of the staff if they were furloughed, one of the negative things that the government have done, they didn't include something called the trunk system, which is a system by which a lot of, as you can imagine, a lot of hospitality staff receive massive top-ups to their income through service charges and tips. The trunk system means that is reported to the government. It is taxable, so they pay income tax on this level. When they furloughed staff, they did it on the non-trunk rate. So a lot of people, instead of being on 80% of their salary, were probably on somewhere between 40 and 60% of their salary for several months, which has been a huge struggle. Across the industry, across suppliers, you've seen a lot of companies and a lot of restaurants have pivoted. They've started doing deliveries. They started doing meal kits. They've started doing delivery of fresh produce and ingredients just to kind of keep teams together, just to keep some income coming in. This has been a massive boost to the sector as far as I can see. The concern is what happens if it's going to be the first sector that gets closed again, and what happens on the 1st of September when this stops.
Yeah, well, I mean, these lockdowns have closed. I mean, in Aberdeen, you can't go now to a pub or a restaurant, and presumably the same is true in the affected parts of Greater Manchester. So there is always the possibility of another short, sharp, or even longer lockdown. Now, on the face of it, you'd imagine that the bigger the chain restaurant, the more likely it is to survive. But I notice that Pizza Express next door to us here has not reopened and will not reopen, perhaps hundreds of its outlets. So even big and well-known chains might not survive this.
No, absolutely. It's been very, very tough times. Before all of this kicked off, or before everything sort of COVID-19 related happened, you had massive increases in rent, you had massive increases in business rates. So a lot of companies, they've been referred to as zombie companies. They were kind of the walking dead before this. To some extent, I think Pizza Express may be a victim of that. I believe they're closing 67 sites. I think they've been struggling for a little while. It is going to give a few businesses an opportunity to perhaps sort of fold, go out of business, close an awful lot of outlets, and with a suitable scapegoat where perhaps it's not been they've not been successful for a long time, perhaps been for whatever reason. It's going to be quite how a lot of these things will bounce back, I don't know. There's not a great rush for new places to come in, certainly in the centre of towns. I think neighbourhood places are going to thrive before the centre of town. I mean, Soho, for example, I know so many people working in and around Soho who aren't renewing leases, who aren't going back into the centre of town. They will be based in the
I'd be one of those, Neil. I mean, I now only go to a place where I can sit outside, for example.
Exactly.
I haven't yet been inside a restaurant, and I'm not sure that I ever will again. How much do you think this will change things, if you like, fundamentally? I see a lot of people now talking about cooking that they are doing at home, including people who never cooked before. Do you think takeaways, home cooking, is going to continue to grow, and maybe we'll never get back to the situation that we had before.
I completely agree. I don't know what the landscape's going to look like. I mean, at the start of all of this, there were an awful lot of webinars for the industry. I sort of sat through a few things on Zoom, and it always seemed to take an hour and a half to come to the conclusion of, well, we don't know what it's going to look like, but we've got to be ready for it when it happens. I think, well, thanks for that. That was great wisdom, and really worth 4.5 hours of my life. So no one really knows what it's going to look like. I think things, as you say, eating at home is still going to be a big part of that. I think a lot of restaurants are now taking advantage of that. There are an awful lot of restaurants doing mail-out kits. There are great restaurants that are selling their ingredients. Places like Hawksmoor and Goodman are sending out steak boxes of quite fantastic meat to their customers and to others. There's a lot of people who've pivoted very, very effectively to get their things out to a wider audience, and in some cases are going from just regional to nationwide. It's going to be, I think, for an awful lot of restaurants, it's also a revenue stream they've maybe not considered in the past. So I think that could be a vital part, certainly again on the neighbourhood thing. It'll be interesting to see what happens. I mean, Soho and Covent Garden have pedestrianised a number of streets, so they put outdoor seating. Like you, I would much prefer to be sitting outside. Quite how that will feel in October remains to be seen.
Neil, I've enjoyed talking to you. Really, I'm really interested in the subject. Thanks for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Now we'll be talking about children needing fathers. Seems to be a rather more controversial idea than I'd thought. But first, 60-second break. Why don't we?
Radio Sputnik.
Tune in every Wednesday to Loud and Clear with Brian Becker and John Kiriakou for a regular segment called Beyond Nuclear, where Brian and John discuss nuclear issues, including weapons, energy, waste, and the future of nuclear technology in the United States, with Kevin Camps, the radioactive waste watchdog at the organization Beyond Nuclear. Listen on Wednesdays right here on Radio Sputnik.
Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com. We are talking
24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
You are listening.
We give you the most essential out of the endless information space.
Radio Sputnik, telling the untold. Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
Hello, America. It is me, Joe Biden. I think I'm not reading a teleprompter. I'm perfectly capable of speaking for myself. Myself.
Radio Sputnik.
George Galloway and the mother of all talk shows. Join us at the College of Knowledge, where there are no tuition fees.
That Joe Biden sounding brighter than I thought he would. Now, poll number 1. Will Lebanon become the next Ukraine, the next Hong Kong, or the next Syria? You're running out of time to get your point of view expressed. You can vote on my Twitter feed. Now, Michael Lewkowicz is Director of Communication at Families Need Fathers, and he should be joining me now. Michael, I hope I got your name right. Please forgive me if I didn't.
That's pretty good. Thank you, George.
I appreciate it. Now, look, I'm a father, and I believe in fatherhood. I believe fathers have responsibilities, and I believe, and I expressed it so, that children need fathers, and that a mother and father are the best model that society has come up with so far for bringing up children. That turns out to be quite a controversial set of views I've got, according to the paperwork I'm receiving. So help me out here.
Well, I mean, your views shouldn't be controversial. In many countries, they're not controversial. Over here, actually, in terms of the public, for the public, they're not particularly controversial. 80% of it, all parents think that both parents after separation should continue to have full involvement with their children. Unfortunately, that's not the reality then of what actually happens in the sort of family justice and support system that we have over here in the UK, which creates massive problems. And we have a system of support that's not fit for purpose. And the result is that you have a lot of people who think that it doesn't work and it breaks down, which is true. It does. It breaks down. It doesn't work effectively. There aren't effective out-of-court routes for people to come to agreements. There is no coherent government strategy for separated families. The result is that it pits parents against each other, and we end up with the worst of all worlds. And in particular, the children suffer, their well-being suffers, and the adults too. So we have a frightful situation. But your beliefs are actually very reasonable, and there's nothing wrong with those. The leaders in the world are countries like, for example, Sweden, Finland, many of the Scandinavian countries, but they're not the only ones, actually have a strategy, a national strategy which they've been applying for the last 40, 50 years, which is to promote and encourage the involvement of fathers as well as mothers in the care as well as the provision financially of support for children. And they've been very effective with that strategy. They've been building on it. The well-being of children is much stronger. They have many fewer mental health issues. There's something like a 30% differential between in well-being of children who have both parents fully involved in their upbringing after separation versus those who do not. So the evidence is there. We just don't have the commitment to make the change, to make the necessary changes that will make a difference and actually help parents to separate in ways that supports their children and actually is ultimately best for everybody.
Now, let's start with, because fathers have got rights, children have got rights, but fathers have responsibilities also. And there's a major problem, isn't there? In this country, in the United States, I'd hazard a guess, of fathers not shouldering their responsibilities. How big a problem is that?
Well, it depends which responsibility you're talking about. Are you talking primarily about financial responsibility or caring responsibilities? But you are right. I mean, the US and the UK are amongst the worst in terms of the provision they offer, for example, for paternity leave, for parental leave for dads when children are born. So it's not entirely surprising that they are that bit less inclined to provide care time for their children because they are so terribly under-supported. We have some of the, in time terms, we have some of the most generous maternity provisions in the world out of OECD countries, and we're down there right at the bottom along with the United States of the rankings on paternity leave. I mean, the US is not very good on maternity leave or paternity leave, but we are particularly bad on that provision. And if you go, for example, somewhere like Sweden or Finland, you'll find that dads are given 3 months of paternity leave, funded at sort of around 80% of their salaries, as well as mums. And this has been a deliberate strategy to engage them from a very early age so that dads actually get to spend care time with their children. And for example, in Finland, 2 or 3 years ago, Finland became the first country in the world where dads actually spend longer caring for their children than mums do. We're only talking about a very small difference, 8 minutes a day. So in effect, they've achieved equality, but they have achieved it through government policy of supporting dads in supporting their children, not only financially, but also in terms of care time. And they're paying the dividends. They're reaping the dividends of that in the well-being of their children, but also in other areas. So, for example, the gender pay gap is narrowest in those countries which offer the best and most generous paternity leave.
That is an interesting point. But nonetheless, Michael, we both know, no point in hiding from it. There's a significant number of fathers that just do a runner. They don't pay unless the government can catch up with them, and even then, it's like drawing teeth. And a lot of fathers simply don't want to be involved. They've moved on. And their dislike of the mother means that they no longer care for their children.
And this is a serious problem, but the problem is also not being very effectively stated in what we hear mostly in the media. Yes, there is a problem with so-called deadbeat dads, those who kind of run away and don't support them. And we would argue, of course, had they been more involved with their children, they would be more supportive. And we know from the figures that involved fathers are much better at financially supporting their children and the mums of their children as well. So there's an issue around involvement and how the system supports their involvement. But also there's a lot of misrepresentation of what actually is going on in terms of the financial support and not committing to the children. There's a huge amount of debt which is accrued under the old CSA and now under CMS, Child Maintenance Service, of child support arrears. But actually, when you look at those arrears, you'll find that the vast majority of it are arrears from people on extremely low incomes. So you're actually, in many cases, dealing with a problem of poverty more than you are of abandonment of responsibility. A lot of, there's a lot of the work that's been done, by both agencies of the government and even the Centre for Social Justice that developed universal credit has identified that there's a problem in the way that the child maintenance calculation works. And the problem is particularly horrendous for people on low incomes, on minimum wages, or who are or part-time work, or in gig economy work. The formula just breaks down because it actually means that by the time they have paid their child maintenance, they cannot afford to pay for a roof over their own head to live and to pay for their own food and their own day-to-day essential living costs. So, we did a survey a few years ago, and 17% of dads who responded to that particular survey, I appreciate it's not a scientific survey, said that they gave up work completely because it didn't pay for them. Now, DWP know this, the Department of Work and Pensions know this, the government know this. It's been reported in many, many authoritative sources to them, but they continue to drag their feet in trying to do something about it. It's one of those hot potato issues that they don't really want to address.
Now, turning to the father's rights, let's be blunt. It is perfectly possible. In fact, it is remarkably common that where a wife or a mother decides, are we still got Michael there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, the mother decides that she no longer wants the father, and immediately the father's relationship with the children is oftentimes fantastically, dramatically disrupted. So one minute you're living with your children, you might be a very good father, but their mother no longer likes you, tells you to leave, and then you're on once a fortnight for a few hours. And only after trenchant negotiation. This is very painful for a father, but it's also potentially disastrous for the children, isn't it?
It's absolutely frightful. We don't have a presumption of shared care in law, a rebuttable presumption. which means that in effect what happens is that possession of the children becomes 90% of the law. And it's very easy for what is usually mothers, it can be fathers too, but it's usually mothers in these situations who, if they don't wish the father to have contact, to simply stop it. And then the only recourse you have, I mean, you can try mediation, but somebody who's determined to block you out of that relationship will block you out. They will simply stop it. And your then only recourse is to try to turn to the support of family justice. And family justice is frightfully ineffective and actually adds to the harm, because it's we have an adversarial justice system, and we have in this country one of the worst problems in the world. Certainly in the developed world, we have one of the worst problems. We have 65,000 children involved every year in private law cases. That's around 10% of births every year. 36% of families are separating before their children reach the age of 16, and they rely on the family courts to assist them. But actually, the family courts are not fit for purpose. It typically the official figures say that it takes 29 weeks to get to a final arrangement from a court. Now, those figures we know are understated because of repeat cases that come back. So in reality, it's probably about 3/4 of a year on average. And now under COVID, we can expect that to go up to be over a year. So it is a frightful, frightful situation. And by that, and a year or 6 months or a year is an absolute age for a 6-year-old or a 5-year-old. It's an eternity, and the damage that's being done is absolutely colossal, both to the father, usually, occasionally the mum, and absolutely to the children who get caught up in it, in the adversarial fight and the battle that ensues. So what we have really is a public health issue, an urgent public health issue that demands proper coordinated government attention to have a proper strategy, an effective strategy for how separated parents should be assisted. We have no guidance, for example, in what the care arrangement should be. So parents go to court not knowing what to expect. They might have avoided going to court if they knew that without domestic abuse or other extenuating circumstances, that they might get a certain share of care time, but there is no published guidance. It's a sort of a no man's land.
Yeah, well, it's hit and miss depending on who the judge is, and of course, there's now no legal aid for people in the family justice system, and it sits in secret for obvious reasons. But that means it's not subject to political or public scrutiny in the way that other parts of the justice system are. And I mean, it goes without saying that you could be the father one day, madly in love with your children, kicked out of the relationship, and a boyfriend can move in the next day without any checks at all on their suitability. And they're suddenly with your children 24 hours a day, and you're lucky if you see them once a week.
You're absolutely right, George. I mean, this is absolutely horrendous. We want there to be a rebuttable presumption that both parents will be involved. We also would like to see something akin to what they do in Florida, which is they have a standing temporary order, which means as soon as people separate, they have an order which basically stipulates a certain minimum amount of time that the child is going to spend with each parent. And if anybody wants to contest that, they can have an urgent hearing to make representations why that shouldn't be the case. But over here, we force people through the most awful, painful process, as you say, to sometimes just get an hour a week or two or nothing. And as time goes by, the delays in the system are so terrible that as time goes by, the status quo becomes the norm. And the status quo ends up being with the children being with their mums in most cases, and dads, actually good dads. We're not talking about people who are harmful to their children. We're talking about good dads who want to care and be responsible for their children, who want to provide care time, who want to support them financially, who find themselves denied reasonable arrangements. And we know that children benefit so much from having both of their parents. They're part of their identity. They are who they are. And you're quite right, George, that the issue with legal aid, I mean, the government removed it 2012 Act, so from 2013 onwards, there's essentially no legal aid unless there's allegations of domestic abuse which are made, and then only to one party. And so the effect is that, as Sir James Munby, the previous president of the Family Division, said, private family law has become a lawyer-free zone. And what you've got is very vulnerable people who have no income or low income, who cannot afford the 250 or more pounds an hour that a lawyer will cost them, who are before a judge, having never been in court before, trying to explain why, having to defend why they need to be or should be involved in their children's lives, just because somebody has said no. I'm not letting you, because they're angry, because they're bitter, because they've moved on and found a new partner. It's absolutely horrendous and totally unacceptable. And we need to have a complete reinvention of the system with better education, better out-of-court settlement routes, clear guidance about shared care arrangements after separation and the benefits to children, and ways of keeping people out of this divisive system, which does such colossal damage to children and their parents. It's beyond imagination. And then, by the way, if you have gone to court, and those who have paid for lawyers, in our own survey, each side has spent on average £23,000, a huge amount of money for most people. And you've got your precious court order which says you're going to see your child every other week, and there's no certainty that it will be complied with or obeyed.
It's often simply not implemented. And then what do? Spend thousands more.
Exactly.
And wait many more months.
Exactly.
I wish we had more time, Michael. Alas, we don't. It's been a pleasure talking to you, even about such a distressing subject. Thank you very much indeed. Michael Lewkowicz of the Families Need Fathers movements. Let me know what you think of what you have heard there. But let me take a call from Beirut. Anastasia is on the line. Anastasia, welcome.
Hi, George. Thank you. Congratulations on the newborn.
Thank you.
And thank you for this platform as well. I just wanted to share with you a bit what I think about what's going on in Lebanon. I am Lebanese myself. I definitely don't think that Lebanon will be the next Syria or Ukraine. Of course, the situation started destabilizing when Hezbollah and its allies were elected by the people to run the government. It will definitely not be easy. It is a war that we're facing right now. But we will not be Syria. I mean, hopefully we will not be Syria or Ukraine or Hong Kong. And about the blast,
it looked a bit Hong Kong yesterday, Anastasia.
Sorry?
It looked a bit like Hong Kong yesterday.
Yeah, it did, but definitely because of the blast, because of everything going on, the tension, the feelings, the emotion that the people are currently experimenting. Of course, the situation does not seem very stable, but knowing the Lebanese community and the Lebanese behavior and the fatigue that we have or that we feel or like will not allow us to continue with these, these behaviors, I would say. The blast definitely was not a coincidence or pure accident. I mean, everybody is saying that, yes, the nonchalance of the government and led to this explosion. But, I mean, the timeline seems a little bit weird and a bit too convenient for the anti-government parties and the West. And if you look generally at the catastrophes or like the man-made catastrophe around the world, they usually come either after war or before war or like during war. It's just like this all seems very weird. And talking about from a business aspect, somebody just deciding that they want to leave the ammonium nitrate because they're just like tired of the litigation, and it just seems like absurd, and it doesn't make any sense that somebody would just like leave their
but the material was worth millions of dollars.
Exactly. So why would somebody just like leave it out there and just not claim it back? So this is nonsense, and this doesn't make any sense. And looking at it from everything going on around in the Middle East and the power dynamics changing, it just does not seem a coincidence. And like using the protesters, and I would say no, the political parties using this tragic event for their I would say for their interest or like political gain. I mean, it all sounds very strange, very bizarre, very absurd.
Anastasia, thank you for that call from the front line in Beirut. 02077 982 255 if you're in the UK. If you're in the US, 001 757 744 4480. I'll be back right after the news.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Tune in every Tuesday to Loud and Clear for a regular segment called False Profits, a weekly look at Wall Street and corporate capitalism, where we talk about the big economic issues of the week from the point of view of working people, the poor, and the U.S. position in the global economy. Join us this Tuesday and every Tuesday with financial policy analyst Daniel Sankey right here on Radio Sputnik.
It's time to double down with Max and Stacy.
Yeah, double down. We're talking markets, finance, business, economics, ka-ching, bling, just about everything money related on Sputnik. It's called Double Down.
We're asking, are dead cats bouncing or have fundamentals changed? That's this week on Double Down.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
Radio Sputnik News.
Brazil has hit a grim milestone of 100,000 coronavirus deaths, only the second country in the world to do so after the United States. The number of people in the country to have died with COVID-19 has rocketed recently, with the coronavirus taking 3 months to kill 50,000 people and then just 50 days to kill the next 50,000. President Jair Bolsonaro, who caught coronavirus last month, has played down the gravity of the pandemic and fought against lockdowns by local officials. The US has recorded 162,425 deaths. Mexico is behind Brazil with 52,006, and there have been 46,651 in the UK, according to Johns Hopkins University. Protesters in Brazil marked the latest death milestone by projecting 100,000 victims of Bolsonaro onto a building in Rio de Janeiro. Britain's Prime Minister Boris Johnson says it's a national priority and a moral duty to get all pupils back in class next month, raising the prospect of closing shops, pubs and restaurants in local lockdowns to allow schools to stay open. In a newspaper article today, the Prime Minister wrote that social justice demands that classrooms are full again and says education is crucial for children's welfare and future, especially the most disadvantaged. Professor Chris Whitty, the Chief Medical Officer for England, warned last week that the nation has probably reached near the limit or the limits of what can be done to reopen society safely. And Professor Neil Ferguson, whose modelling led to the decision to impose the lockdown, suggested ministers would need to row back on the relaxation of restrictions to allow a full-time return to schools while keeping the virus under control. Only 53% of Britons would be certain or very likely to allow themselves to be vaccinated against COVID-19, according to new research. 1 in 6 said they would definitely not get a vaccine, or it would be very unlikely, in a poll of around 2,000 people. The study found that people were more likely to reject the vaccine because of their attitudes and beliefs about science and authority, rather than reasons related to the coronavirus itself. Young people were twice as likely not to want a vaccine, with 22% of 16 to 34-year-olds saying that they would not have one, compared to just 11% of 55 to 75-year-olds. US President Donald Trump has taken executive action to provide economic aid to millions of Americans hit by the pandemic, claiming he was forced to do so after talks at Congress broke down. The directives include measures to support the unemployed, suspend payroll tax, and extend student loans. Some of them are likely to face legal challenges, given that Congress controls federal spending, not the president. Democratic rival Joe Biden said they were a series of half-baked measures. Negotiations broke down on Friday after 2 weeks of talks. It's not known whether the move will mean the end of discussions between senior government officials and top Democrats for a stimulus package. Trump said the measures would provide up to $400 in supplemental unemployment benefits to tens of millions of jobless Americans. This is less than the $600 people had been receiving until the 31st of July, when the benefit expired. The UK has pledged a further £20 million in aid to Lebanon following Tuesday's deadly explosion in Beirut. The support will go directly to those injured and displaced by the explosion, providing access to food and medicine, as well as other urgent supplies. The UK, which has already given £5 million to the emergency relief effort, said it showed its commitment to stand by the Lebanese people in their hour of need. The blast in the city's port destroyed large parts of the surrounding area, killing more than 150 people, injuring more than 5,000, and leaving more than 300,000 homeless. Voters are casting their ballots in Belarus, with 5-term President Alexander Lukashenko facing his toughest challenge in years from a political novice. Although Lukashenko is still expected to win, he faces a prominent rival in 37-year-old Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, who is running in place of her jailed husband. Lukashenko, aged 65, was first elected in 1994. His previous landslide victories were condemned by political observers. In the last vote in 2015, he was declared winner with 83.5% of the vote. There were no serious challenges, and election observers reported problems in the counting and tabulation of votes. Today, long queues were seen at some polling stations, including at Belarusian embassies abroad. The music mogul Simon Cowell has broken his back while testing his new electric bicycle at his home in California. Cowell, aged 60, was trying out the bike in the courtyard of his Malibu home when he fell off. He is understood to have had surgery on Saturday evening. A political row between the UK and France over migrant crossings in the Channel has intensified, with Britain's immigration minister saying that the unacceptable increase in numbers simply cannot go on. Chris Philip is due to meet his French counterpart in Paris on Tuesday to discuss stronger measures, including interceptions and returns. It comes after 151 migrants reached the UK on Saturday, taking the total since the 1st of January to 4,100, many arriving in overloaded rubber dinghies. While the southeast England basked in roasting sunshine today, a dozen more people took advantage of calm seas to arrive in Dover after making the dangerous crossing. And finally, scientists in Germany are trying to create the first northern white rhino test tube baby to save the species from extinction. The northern white is functionally extinct after decades of poaching and the wholesale loss of natural habitat. There are 2 remaining females kept under armed guard at a conservancy in Kenya, but neither animal is able to reproduce. The last northern white male, named Sudan, died in 2018. Inside a concert pen in northern Germany, a 17-year-old female called Karen has been selected for the critically important experiment. The scientists are trying to turn her into a mother with fertilized eggs or embryos created in the lab. Theoretically, at least, in vitro fertilization, or in this case, rhino IVF, has the potential to save the northern white rhino, a once numerous grazer which ranged over large parts of Central and Eastern Africa. Well, that's the latest here on Sputnik News. I'm Jamie Lowe.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
Now, my friends thought I might need some help in picking a name for my new child. So they've come up with A, Nicola, B, Maggie, and I don't even know how to say the third one, Persephone, C, Persephone. I have no idea which century that comes from. So, A, Nicola, B, Maggie, C, Persephone, or you can leave a comment on my Twitter feed suggesting your own name, and many have been kind enough to do so already. Later, before the end of the show, I'll show you our picture and tell you if I've accepted any of your suggested names. Now, you'll remember Omar in Dubai referred to a video showing an explosion in Syria, which was remarkably similar to the one that took place in Beirut. And so we went looking for it, and the lads have found it. Can we see it? It is another amazing mushroom-type affair. I can't see the color of it. Is the smoke red, like the smoke in Beirut was red? That I can't see, but it is extraordinary. It's not red. And this was 7 months ago. Well, it's one of these coincidences, perhaps. And now Dr. Ranjeet, who has helped us through every day of the crisis, which shows no signs of ending. The coronavirus crisis is spiraling in some places, particularly in the United States, out of control, literally out of control. And nothing that the president says or does from the podium, from the presidency, helps apparently in any way. Here in Britain, where we have one of the worst outcomes in the whole world, that's England and Scotland, despite propaganda to the contrary. Scotland has the third worst outcome in the world. Britain as a whole has the third worst outcome in the world. Contrary to propaganda, there is no material difference between the outcomes in England and in Scotland. Both are dreadful. And now we have new lockdowns in Scotland, in Aberdeen, which is causing a lot of controversy, and in northwest England, in the greater Manchester area, now extended to Preston. So we better hear from the doctor just how he thinks this is all developing. Dr. Ranjeet, thanks as always for joining us. Tell us, if you will, the thinking behind new lockdowns and whether they are likely to become a new normal, i.e. local, regional lockdowns rather than one size fits all.
George, thanks for having me back on. Pleasure to be with you, and congratulations on the birth of your beautiful baby daughter.
Thank you.
I think Stephanie's a nice name, by the way.
Okay. I'll take your word for it.
Sorry, George. Sticking to topic, as you say, coronavirus very much still with us. Almost 20 million cases diagnosed in the world, with 732,000 deaths. And the United States this week exceeded 5 million. Brazil exceeded 3 million. And India, 2.2 million. So cases absolutely out of control in a whole swathe of states across the southern and eastern part of the United States in particular, from Texas all the way through Tennessee, Georgia, Florida, up towards New York, where there are fewer cases now, but many, many, many states experiencing a surge, an increase in cases and an increase of deaths. And they're having the problem of really greater than 1,000 deaths again per day for the last 3 weeks. I mean, a few days less, but on average, greater than 1,000 deaths a day for the last 3 weeks. In the United Kingdom, clearly our death rate has fallen markedly compared to the peak, where we also had a 3-week period of 1,000 deaths per day. Of course, we're a very much smaller country than the United States. So that's really, as you say, very much more significant in terms of cases per million of the population, which is why we have the poor outcome, relatively speaking, you're talking about. The trouble with our approach to coronavirus has always been the same, and I don't like to be repetitive. I would love to give good news and say that we're doing a wonderful job, but I fear that we're not doing a wonderful job, and the public health measures remain the only really effective measures we have against COVID. Those nations which have basically returned to normal are those which have effectively eliminated COVID, George, and it can be done, and it should be done, and that was the correct approach. Clearly, it's easier to eliminate when the numbers are small than when they're large. And in fact, some of the measures we introduced, which seemed a little illogical to a lot of people, we introduced very late. We introduced a lockdown, which was just a very crude measure to stop anyone from seeing anyone, stopping the virus from having fuel. And then once the late case numbers were low, we've released lockdown, and we're meant to be doing track and trace very well. What's very clear is that we're not doing track and trace very well, and that's intimately linked to the privatization and outsourcing of all these services. Actually, there are two kind of bodies performing track and trace at the moment. As I mentioned previously in one of the shows, it was Serco. Serco is a private company who run prison contracts and hospital catering programs, but also various other services. They're a logistics company who will accept money, large contracts from the government, and then employ people to do the job. They don't have any particular experience of track or trace in a pandemic, but that didn't stop them from bidding any more than many other companies had no experience of providing PPE. They have so far been giving 208 million. They've employed 27,000 people. Those 27,000 people during the 12 weeks in which they've been employed have, on average, George, contacted 2 people each. That's 2 people each. So it's an incredibly low number, and it works out at about just half the numbers of contacts that they need to have traced to really have effective sight of the virus. So it's a straightforward thing. We don't yet have a vaccine that works. I understand why people are kind of bored with this story to an extent. There are other things that are killing more. Poverty kills 30, 40 million people a year, 12, 13 million children a year. But COVID comes on top of all that.
On top of it, yeah, exactly. They are already dying. This is on top of that. Absolutely. And, it really is showing how poorly our health system, as it's being privatized and wound down, is able to adapt. If you contrast that very poor job that Serco have done, it's been criticized by Alison Pollock, it's been criticized by Independent Sage, I think very effectively, and we'll come back a little bit in Independent Sage and the policies they're putting forward as how we go forward. But if you contrast that to actually the NHS's own staff, to the extent that, we have still a local health teams of Public Health England in place, they've been under strong threats, strong cuts for a long period of time. But they, on the other hand, have traced far greater numbers, so about 140,000 people they've traced, and they're considered more complex cases in the community, whereas Serco simply employs someone who pick up the phone, and they're very ineffective because if people don't pick up the phone, they've got no other way of pursuing those contacts. The local health teams can visit houses, can speak to people, can win their trust, can make them understand that they're not there as a sinister third party, but simply trying to help the community's health in the same way that a district nurse might visit us if we come out of hospital and need a wound changing. So there's a system of rapport, and they're able to trace people and actually question them, sit down and help them fill in the answers. Who are the people who've been in contact? Who could you have infected? People do generally want to help. And they have contacted, unbelievably, about 99% of their targets. So, and yet Serco, their contract's coming up for renewal, and they're scheduled to get another 400 million. I think it's very likely they will get that, precisely because we've seen again and again that is the favoured option of our government. So, our numbers are lower. I think if you look over the last week, 372 people, if you have died. There may be more to come. And of course, those numbers are relatively low, but 372 people is not really a small number, George. And this is, as again, Independent Sage point out, this should be the
easiest time to control the virus. People are not at school, people are not at university, more people are on holiday. The weather is such that people are outside enjoying themselves and not in crowded spaces. So all of the conditions are in our favor, and yet it's been pointed out that, just as we said last week, it's been popularly recognized in the press this week that the R rates pretty much across the board are creeping back towards the 1, and at some places exceeding 1. So in other words, the numbers of infections are increasing, the numbers of deaths are down, the numbers of test positive proven cases are increasing again, over 1,000 towards 1,100 over the last 24 hours per day. And that's the numbers test proven based on antibody results. As we said last week, it's likely to be actually 3 or 4 times that, perhaps 4,500 people getting the virus a day. At this one, it should be the easiest time to control. And therefore, that's led to a whole lot of renewed discussion about what are the things that should be opening and what are the things that should be closing, and just how effective it is to let it run rampant in the community and then shut everything down again, and doing it piecemeal here and there. Of course, it means that there's very mixed messages. People are fed up of quite a long sacrifice of several months that they've been effectively putting their lives on hold. They're told that that's why the economy has been tanking, though actually there's been a very severe systemic crisis of capitalism, as I think you've had Professor Wolf on your show and pointed out quite well. This is not just coronavirus, this is a problem inherent in our economic system, which is compounded by coronavirus but not caused by it. And of course, desperate to get the economy going again, but in the process have taken the foot off the brakes, and without doing the simple public health things that really can mean, like Vietnam has, like New Zealand has, as of course China did very early on, and made it, its results published to the world and told us, really gave us a blueprint of how to approach this correctly. We're not doing those things, George, and so it's perhaps boring that the story knocks on and on and on.
No, it's not at all boring, at least not as you comment on it. Last point, Doctor. If cases are going up again, as they are, but deaths are going down, does that mean the virus is running out of toxicity, that it is not as deadly as it was, or another reason?
Well, to me, it indicates that we also see that lag. So someone's infected and the virus runs quite a long course. So though it can manifest symptoms soon, can take 2 or 3 weeks to show symptoms. And the illness, if people who are in intensive care, some of them, as for example, the poet Michael Rosen, or author, run for 2 or 3 months. So the deaths, there's a long lag between when the infections are. So what it probably means is that if infections start going up, then I'm afraid in a number of weeks, we will start to see that the deaths stop falling and the trend is reversed. Of course, it may be that the most vulnerable people are now more effectively isolated. Certainly our testing capacity has increased, though again, privatized, contracted out, and not well coordinated. So it's possible that the death rate is lower, but we've got no strong evidence as to why that would be. So it's likely to be the case that if the R rate starts going up, the number of cases start going up, I'm afraid to say that the number of people who succumb to the virus will also go up in a number of weeks, George.
Dr. Ranjeet, thank you, and we'll see you next week, because this isn't going away anytime soon. Thank you again for your help. Now, what should I name my new child? To my astonishment, Persephone, which I'd genuinely never heard of before, is doing rather well. Persephone, 38%, Maggie, 39%, that's those of a certain age, and Nicola, 23%. You can vote now on my Twitter feed. Here's a call from Coventry. Staffan in Coventry on Beirut. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, good evening, George. Congratulations on the birth of your newborn.
Thank you so much.
And thank you for coming on tonight after 48 hours without sleep. It's much appreciated.
I haven't slept, but I'm running on tea.
Yeah, I'm glad you haven't got so tired just speaking like Joe Biden yet. But no, it's great to it's great that you've made it tonight.
Thank you.
Yeah, it really saddened me to see Lebanon and what happened and the deaths. It's traumatic, and it just takes me back to sort of late 70s, my early adult years in the 80s, where all I saw was tragedy in Beirut, bombings by Israeli jets, just terrorist, bombings. It was all, every time you switch the news on, there's something bad happening in Beirut. And I really feel for the people over there. It's just, it's just tragic. I don't know what's happened. I saw Rania earlier on talking about it, and I'm glad she survived. But yeah, my heart goes out to people of that country. What have they done to deserve all this? It's just,
it's very unlucky for Lebanon. It, through no fault of its own, had to accommodate hundreds of thousands. It's a very small place. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinian refugees in 1948, then again in 1970 after the events in Jordan, and then again intermittently through the decades. And then when the war against Syria began, had to absorb hundreds of thousands of Syrian refugees. This in a very small and poor country, a country without industry of its own, without significant agriculture of its own, a place where Arabs who did have wealth from Iraq, from the Gulf, used to come and buy property and deposit money and have holidays and so on, all of which is now at an end. So even without this disastrous explosion, Lebanon was in a very, very serious situation. And now, God knows what will happen. The only thing that makes me think they'll come out of it is they've come out of so much before. The Lebanese are quite an extraordinary people, I tell you.
They are, and that's the point I was going to make, that the fact that they've survived so much in the past, I'm sure they'll come out of this stronger even more. And, it's just remarkable, the resilience of the people over there. That they seem to, I know there's a lot of trouble going on, and it does resemble Hong Kong, but it's,
if it's going to be any of those three, let's hope it's Hong Kong and not the other two. Hong Kong God we can live with. Two of my children are half Lebanese, and as I say, I entered Lebanon well over 40 years ago, and it took me into the Arab world, which has been an absorbing interest of mine for well over half of my life. So it's very important to me.
Yeah, it does hold a great deal of personal affection in your heart as well, George. But, there's another point to make to the guy I phoned up to get on this show is how much more I've started watching RT, and one of the reasons behind that is the fact that when they have guests on like yourself, or people with other opposite views, they actually let them speak.
Yeah. Exactly.
Without interruption. They let you,
You know, Stefan, I am on 7 days a week, and I write a column. Nobody has ever, not ever, in the nearly 10 years I've been working here, 10 years, has ever said to me that I shouldn't say something or I should say something. That would never happen at the BBC or Sky, Stefan.
Oh, no, I've watched some of your older stuff on there, and I've seen you when you have been on in the past, and I think, well, look, just let the man speak, will you?
Exactly,
and it's like, and it's not, it's not just yourself, it's anybody who seems to go on these shows, and then it's like, they can't get away with anything, but Rick Sanchez show, absolutely brilliant, Manila, all of them. You had the irrepressible Rachel Blevins on tonight.
They're wonderful, and Rachel's a rising star, Stefan. Rachel, you're going to remember later that you first saw her on here and on RT America. Stefan, thanks for the lovely call. I appreciate it. You've still got time to call 02077 982 255, or in the US 001 757 744 4480. Raymond is in London on Lebanon. Go ahead, Raymond.
Hello, George. First, let me congratulate you and your wife.
Thank you, sir.
On a fantastic. It's such an honour, isn't it, to have a baby, whether it's the first one or the sixth one. It's just the same, isn't it?
Unbelievable.
Right. Whatever happened, George? No, I'm not well read in the subject. I'll follow you on a number of platforms. But whatever happened to the Arab League?
Yes, the Arabs have a league. As I always say, if they do, it's a Vauxhall Conference League, Raymond, not the Premiership.
Yeah, well, They need to have an Arab League again with Syria and all the rest of the countries that stand together against these oppressions, because someone, somewhere, is trying to unstabilise the Lebanon, like they unstabilised Iraq, like they unstabilised Syria,
Libya.
like they unstabilised Iran, like they have... That's what I want to know from you, George.
Well, I'll tell you
what can be done, really?
Nothing, because the Arabs are completely divided. There are people trying to destabilize them, and there have been devastating wars against Arab countries from Israel, from America, from Britain, from France, and others, in the case of Libya. But the Arabs are pretty good at murdering themselves, murdering each other, and are remarkably easily set to each other's throat for the purpose of keeping them divided, so that they will be weak, so that they can be robbed. There's no point in beating about the bush here. Arabs have agency. They could decide not to murder each other. They could have decided that whether America wanted the overthrow of Bashar or not, they were not going to go along with it. Whether the government of Saddam Hussein was bad or not, they were not going to collaborate with the British and American governments to invade and occupy it. They could have decided, whatever they thought about Colonel Gaddafi, replacing him with ISIS and Al-Qaeda was definitely not a step forward, and so on. So the point, Raymond, is this, that the Arabs are divided and weak. The West wants to keep them divided and weak. For 100 years they have been divided and weak, and the West was very happy for that to be so, and arranged things so that it was more likely to be so. Last word to you, Raymond.
Thank you very much, George. It is, in fact, the College of Knowledge, brother.
Thank you, my dear
very
friend.
much.
Thank you, my dear friend. I've got 3 pages of baby names. Stacey says, I love Persephone. Well, that's Dr. Ranjeet and Stacey both love Persephone. It's growing on me. Sandy says, Grace, because I'm sure she'll have it. And Humpty Dumpty says, Ghislaine. That's mischievous. Alejandro says, a wise man lets his wife decide. Well, actually, I picked all of my children's names, and all of them were good picks, I think, and their mothers agree. Twitter user says, Georgette, of course. And Leo says, I'm sorry, but I can't get behind any of those. Maybe something like Sky. Warm, Leo, warm. And Paul says, just tuned in. Baby name suggestion, Alaska. That's a nice one, actually. And Fra says, I believe the explosion in Beirut was accidental only because a fire preceded it, which triggered the nitrate. But an inquiry may establish its provenance. And on Facebook, Phil says, I didn't know George was old enough to have children yet. And Jazz says, in a few months, we'll start hearing the effects on people from the ammonium nitrate, from breathing problems, respiratory infections, etc. And James says, Bojo should resign. He did an awful job. And on Twitter, Claire says, loving the new Labour ad that played at the last break. Hilarious and true, sadly. I didn't actually hear it. But that was the week. This is where I look at the 7 days in history which changed our world for good and bad. It was on this day, in 1945, that the United States dropped the second atomic bomb called Fat Man on Nagasaki, Japan, destroying part of the city and killing an estimated 50,000 people just like that. In 1965, Singapore separated from the Federation of Malaysia and gained its independence. And in 1974, Richard Nixon resigned as President of the United States over the Watergate break-in scandal, and Vice President Gerald Ford was sworn in to take his place as the 38th US President. In 1969, the actress Sharon Tate was found brutally murdered in her LA home, along with 3 high society friends and a 5th victim. In January 1971, Charles Manson and 3 of his followers, Susan Atkin, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Leslie Van Houten, were convicted of the Tate LaBianca murders after the longest murder trial in US history. In 1971, the Prime Minister of Northern Ireland, Brian Faulkner, introduced a new law giving the authorities the power to indefinitely detain suspected terrorists without trial. More than 300 suspects were detained in a series of dawn raids. 2 days later, in 2003, Britain recorded its hottest day ever. What, like hotter than today? As the temperature soared to 38.1. That's 100.6 degrees Fahrenheit in old money. That was in Gravesend in Kent. I don't know what it reached in London today, but it was pretty close to that, I can tell you. And on the 12th of August, 1964, one of the so-called great train robbers escaped from Winson Green Prison in Birmingham. Charlie Wilson, then aged 32, was apparently freed by a gang of 3 men who broke into the jail in the early hours of the morning. Wilson went on the run for 4 years and was finally recaptured in Canada and returned to jail in the UK, where he served out the rest of his sentence. He then moved to the Costa del Sol in Spain, of course, where he is alleged to have become involved in drug dealing and was shot dead by a hitman on the 23rd of April 1990 as he relaxed by his swimming pool. By the way, a big thanks to my friends in the Prison Officers Association for their very, very kind greetings and congratulations, good wishes on the birth of my latest child. The journalist at the centre of the controversy surrounding the death of weapons expert Dr. David Kelly on the same day in 2003 admitted that his language wasn't perfect when he reported the government had sexed up its weapons dossier on Iraq. Of course, it wasn't perfect, it was a grotesque understatement. Andrew Gilligan, the aforementioned defence correspondent of the BBC Radio 4 Today programme, was giving evidence to the Hutton inquiry on its second day. Hutton absolved the government of any kind of dishonourable, underhand or duplicitous strategy in the leaking of Dr. Kelly's name to the press. Well, you'll find out in my forthcoming film just how far off beam the late Justice Hutton was in that case. On the 13th of August 1961, troops in East Germany sealed off the border between East and West Berlin, shutting off the escape route for thousands of refugees from the East, it says here. Within days, troops began replacing the barbed wire with concrete blocks, and the wall became a permanent structure. It was, of course, the Berlin Wall, which eventually reached nearly 12 feet high and 66 miles long. On the same day in 1966, China announced plans for a new leap forward after the first meeting in 4 years of the Communist Party's Central Committee. And the so-called Cultural Revolution heralded a dramatic purge of Mao's rivals. On August the 14th in 1969, the British government sent troops into Northern Ireland in what it said was a limited operation to restore law and order. The Army's warm welcome was short-lived, as was the British government's intention to pull out the troops within days. And finally, on the 15th of August 1945, Japan surrendered unconditionally to the Allies after almost 6 years of war. The Allies had delivered Japan an ultimatum to surrender on the 28th of July. When this was ignored, the US dropped the 2 atomic bombs on Hiroshima 6th August and Nagasaki 9th August. That was the week that was in all of our histories. Okay, coming up in the next 20 minutes, exclusive photos of my new child. I held them back so that the mother of all talk shows audience would be the first to see them. 1 million people received the birth notice that I put out on Twitter. 1.1 million impressions, 10,500 likes, 1,200, 1,500 comments. It's absolutely extraordinary. So I do know that there is interest in the baby, and she's coming up shortly. But you can still vote for Persephone, Nicola, or Maggie. Be back in a second.
Tune in every Thursday to Loud and Clear with Brian Becker for a regular segment called Criminal Injustice about the most egregious conduct of our courts and how justice is denied to so many people in this country. Tune in to Loud and Clear this Thursday and every Thursday for thorough and independent analysis of our criminal injustice system.
Stop banging on the toilet door, Amber. Stop banging on the toilet door. You're gonna frighten the pilot. Anyway, I'll talk to you when we land. Although that could take a considerable amount of time.
Oh, Johnny.
Breaking news, expert analysis, and exclusive stories, all in one place. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Global higher education with one of the world's best-known iconoclasts, the mother of all talk shows, with George Galloway.
Time is running, so let's get as many calls in as we can. William is in London on Prince Andrew. Go ahead, William.
Hello there. Nice to speak to you.
And you, sir.
Thank you for having me on.
Welcome.
I'm calling in a reaction, actually, to an earlier caller who was calling about the arms trading, perhaps, of the Maxwell family in general.
Yeah, I think he might have been getting confused. He said that Epstein was involved in arms trading, but I have not seen any report of that.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to bring perhaps to the table the cable from WikiLeaks regarding Prince Andrew's, in fact, role in trade and what sort of views and affairs he may have had within, within the trading in that area.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. Remind us.
Well, we know in 2010 his relationships with sort of Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan were a little bit promiscuous, to say the least. And then the cable came out saying that he was sort of condoning bribery and so on and so forth from the BAE and the cable between himself and America, the diplomatic cable which went through there, which the Guardian published. I find that very, very interesting, and I think it's important to remember that time at this time and with what we see going on. I
don't quite know why he has had apparent money troubles all of his life. He is the Queen's son. He used to get, anyway, a handsome sum. Most things like castles and so on are provided to him. And yet he seems to have had a constant need to get down and dirty doing business with some rum characters.
Yes.
The Duchy of Lancaster provides the Queen with a very, very substantial sum of money, and he gets an allowance. So why he has to do business in Kyrgyzstan, I have no idea.
Yeah. Well, that's going back to something you said before that you'd experienced in the House of Parliament, very, very unsavoury experience, to say the least, at the very least. What brought me such attention in this particular area was that I had been through a certain sort of relationship with Russia. A partner of mine I was sponsoring to bring from Russia to the UK, and we went through hell on earth. You know, I was accused of being a spy in the High Court by the UKPA for absolutely no reason. But during that time, obviously, I needed, and big shout out here to Julian Assange, please, because he really helped me during that time, and it's very nice to be able to say that. But during that, I was in Russia, and I had, you know, I won't go into it here, but really some very odd communications with people, you know, relating to sort of blood diamonds, things like that, you know, conflict diamonds. I think it's all very relevant, and I again, Julian Assange, you know, he brought all that to the table, and I really would just like to remember him in this time as well, you know.
Hat tip to Julian Assange. William, thanks for the call. First-time caller. Don't be a stranger. Michael is in Gothenburg. Go ahead, Michael.
Okay, I just wanted to weigh in on the blast in Beirut. I have no specific information, but I just would encourage people not to conspiracy theorize too much. I do know about the Russian vessel that was delivering aluminum nitrate to, and it was actually on its way to continue to.
It wasn't Russian. It was Ukrainian. It was registered.
It was Ukrainian.
Yeah, an important difference.
Yes, God, and it was on its way to.
It was registered from Moldova, which is, of course, a prime maritime nation.
Right, and it was going to travel further to Mozambique, was it not?
Yeah, there's some doubt as to whether it was going to Africa or whether it was going to the Wahhabist rebels in Syria. There's doubt about that.
Okay, yeah. See, and now I did say I don't want to float conspiracy theories. Now, an interesting thing about the term conspiracy theory is that phrase was itself minted by the CIA to discourage people from, to make people seem ridiculous for questioning the motives of the CIA.
Sure.
Is that correct? Yeah.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And of course, there have been plenty of conspiracies. Some of the biggest events in our time, Michael, have been conspiracies. But that doesn't mean that everything is a conspiracy.
Correct. And the conspiracy theory is either true or it's false.
Yeah.
So it's nothing to...
quite. If it looks like a duck, walks like a duck, and quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck.
Thank you. Yes, I'm active. I just wanted to put this out there. I'm active as a member of the in Swedish it's called Judar för Israelisk-Palestinsk fred, the Jews for a Israeli-Palestinian peace. And so we are working here in Gothenburg to promote public opinion, where the Palestinian rights of the rights of the Palestinian people are not to be overlooked in any way, shape, or form, and Israel is, just way out of line, and it's got to be reined in. And I don't know where to begin with that, but
no time, alas, now on this show. But a big shout out to all friends in Denmark, in Gothenburg, and to the Jewish Voices for Palestinian Rights in particular. I'm very grateful. Go on. Last word, Mike.
I think it's just so important for us as Jews to show that we are not going down this Zionist propaganda path and to vilify people, an entire people. That just doesn't make any sense.
Amen. Thank you, Michael. God bless you. Sam is in West Yorkshire on Fathers. Go ahead, Sam.
Hi, George. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to say, I want to tell all the men out there, all the fathers, that you don't have to do anything wrong. You don't have to be abusive, or you don't have to do anything illegal. Once you've split up with your ex, she can cut you out of your children's lives forever. I spent 2 years.
And even if you're not cut out, it'll be from going from living with them 24 hours a day to contact on a Tuesday at 6 o'clock, handed back at 8 o'clock.
That was me, George. When we split up initially, the children was living with me. I mean, she was having mental problems. So we agreed that the children would live with me. And for a year, they lived with me. And then when she decided that she wanted the children back in their lives, all she had to do was to go to court. And the court did not rule in her favour in the beginning. So eventually, she started making allegations of domestic and sexual abuse. And then all of a sudden, I was completely cut out of the children's lives. The police turned up at my house at 1 o'clock in the morning. They took the kids. I had no idea that this was going on. This happened overnight, and then I spent I spent two years fighting. First, the allegations, which are unproven. I don't have a criminal record. I've never broken the law. I've never been in court. I never even raised my voice at the children, George. But then all of a sudden, she makes these allegations, and I have not seen the kids in 13 years.
Oh, dear
God. I spent 2 years fighting in court. I exhausted all my savings. I quit my job so I could spend full time on this legal case. And then after I run out of money, I couldn't afford to go to court anymore. And I haven't seen my kids in 13 years.
Heartbreaking, Sam. I'm very sorry to hear that. But the hour is such, I really can't go into it any further. I need to move on. Nikki is in Paris on coronavirus, the pandemic. Nikki, welcome.
Hi, George, and congratulations from me as well on our new little comrade.
Thank you.
Persephone is Greek, by the way. She was the daughter of Demeter, the goddess of agriculture, a very important classical figure from mythology.
Very uneducated and ignorant of me not to have heard of her. And the name is growing on me. I don't think it will grow on my wife.
It's a great name, but she'll have to spell it all her life.
Exactly, that's the problem. I like short names, Nikki. Short names that the Chinese can say easily. These are my important rubrics. Of course, they've got to have a meaning and so on, but short that the Chinese can say, because I figure by the time my children grow up, well, the Chinese are going to be the most important country in the world. Anyway, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, so I wanted to ask you about what you, as George, would do exactly to handle the pandemic socially and economically. What is the best way to handle this
I wouldn't have started from here. Being half an Irishman, I'm allowed to say that. As the Irishman apocryphally did when asked the way to Dublin. The only way to handle this is in a draconian, even authoritarian way. If you're New Zealand with a sparse population, widely flung, and high levels of education and health services, you can do it a different way. But the reason that China, which would easily, given the intensely, densely populated areas of China, did not become a complete catastrophe, is because China acted as its system allowed it to do in an extremely authoritarian manner. Therefore, it literally, when they said lockdown, they don't mean a lockdown that you still get on the bus or you still go into work on the underground. Lockdown is lockdown in China. Means that you simply cannot go anywhere, that you must stay in your house, that you will be arrested if you come out of your house. That's the kind of decisive state, centralized state action that China took. And that's what stopped the catastrophe that China would otherwise have been. Now, of course, South Korea, which is also, by the way, relatively speaking, for a Western-oriented capitalist country, quite authoritarian, quite centrally strong as a state power, did something of the same. But I think that China and Vietnam dealt with this best, and they did so by taking draconian and even authoritarian action right at the beginning. Nikki, last word.
I agree, but they're socialist systems. The thing is, how does one do the draconian thing under a capitalist system where a worker has the choice of dying of poverty or dying of the virus?
Quite so. Well, that's the superiority of the socialist system so far as I infer you are concerned. We should have done as much as we could, like China and South Korea. As long as our system was able to, we should have gone down that road. I've got to go, Nikki, because Nicola in Swindon wants to talk about the same subject. Nicola, go ahead.
Good evening to you, George, and congratulations on the birth of your daughter.
Thank you so much.
I do hope you picked the name Nicola. After all, it's a great name.
Wonderful name.
It is a wonderful name. But we're an island, George. We should have closed the airports and the ports way back at the beginning of the year.
We allowed millions of people to fly in here, including from the worst affected places.
Yes, millions in and out, and it's been spread. When you've got a world pandemic, you don't go zooming around the world, spreading it from one place to another, which is what people have done. Quite innocently, some of them, but...
I'm sure all of them. Nobody wants to spread a pandemic.
We should have closed it.
But we should have really locked down, Nicola. Really locked down. Nobody goes out. Nobody goes to work. Nobody moves around. Nobody flies in here. We are an island, after all. We could actually have protected ourselves in that way.
So easy to have done. And the numbers, the reason I've been told that the numbers are increasing now is because we are actually testing people and finding people with the virus who don't have any symptoms. Whereas at the height of the virus, they weren't testing because they didn't want even more people coming to the hospital. Whereas now we are actually looking for it rather than it just appearing.
How do you get tested, Nicola? Given my age and given that my wife was pregnant until yesterday, why were we never tested? Why were we never offered a test? Who got tested if not us?
I do not know. I was nearly tested. I was driving along and some fella leapt out and went and waved me into the testing centre, and I was actually just trying to get home for my dinner. But I nearly got tested by mistake.
Yeah, it always struck me as funny why somebody of my age with a pregnant wife and many small children, I would have thought I was high on the list to get a test. But I was never able to get one.
I would have thought so as well.
Well, there you go.
How this government works in mysterious ways, I will never understand it.
Exactly. Thanks, Nicola. Nice to talk to you. What name should I choose for my new child? A, Nicola, 24%, up 1. B, Maggie, 37%, down 2. And C, Persephone, 39%, down 1. So who would have thought that the most popular suggestion would have been Persephone, who we now know is a figure of classical importance? It did grow on me, and I'm sorry for all the people who sent in beautiful name suggestions that I simply haven't had time to reach. I'm really grateful to you for going to all that trouble. Now, the poll is closed. 686 of you voted. Persephone won, but the child will actually be called, if you want to write this down, because it's slightly complicated. Her first name is Oban, like the Scottish beautiful little Scottish town, Oban, with the fada going to the left at the top of the O, Oban. Oban Amaria, A-M-A-R-I-A. Oban Amaria Galloway. And there she is, my latest little darling. And there she is. There's a family picture taken earlier today. And this is Gayatri it was a home birth This is her in the pool. We rented a pool at the bottom of the bed. Two wonderful, totally wonderful. Oh my goodness.
Congratulations from the guys behind the glass.
Thank you. I didn't expect that. Thanks so much, Ron. That's very touching. Thank you. So she gave birth in this pool with two wonderful midwives. Totally wonderful. I mean, it always amazes me when I have close contact with National Health Service people, how dedicated they are. I mean, they'd get their wages whether they were really conscientious and dedicated or not. It's truly a vocation. These two women really cared that this baby should be born healthily. It was very grueling. As I say, I'm over it now. But my poor wife is still very tired, and the baby is too. But there she is with her brother and sister. So it's perfect symmetry, actually. By the grace of God, I have 6 children, 3 boys and 3 girls. Isn't that perfect? I'm so blessed. I thank God for all of my blessings. And I thank you for all of the good wishes that you have been sending me by all platforms over the last few days. And thank you to my dear friends. Who knew that my friends through there knew how to pick flowers? Thank you very much for watching, for listening. It's been marvelous for me. I hope it was for you. And if it was, come back next week at the same time, in the same place, and join me again for the mother of all talk shows. I'm going home now for another sleepless night. Hope it didn't show too much. Good night.